20,000 years ago, sunrise never came to Manhattan. Not because the sun stopped rising, but because 2 meters of solid ice had buried everything from Times Square to Central Park, where skyscrapers stand today. Pressure from frozen water, weighing billions of tons, crushed bedrock into powder. The Statue of Liberty's future home lay under glaciers taller than the Empire State Building. This wasn't science fiction, this was Tuesday. The last glacial maximum had arrived and Earth had become an alien planet. Global temperatures plummeted 11 degrees south below today's average. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize it meant the difference between a habitable world and a frozen tomb. Chicago's climate suddenly matched modern Antarctica. Miami felt like Alaska, and Alaska became Mars with oxygen. But here's what should have been impossible. Humans were there, not just surviving, thriving. In a world where exhaled breath froze before it hit the ground, where exposed skin developed frostbite in minutes, where predators with 4-inch fangs considered humans a convenient snack. Our ancestors did something that defies logic. They looked at this frozen hellscape and said, "This is home." The archaeological evidence is undeniable. While glaciers crushed continents, humans were making jewelry. While saber-toothed cats stalked the darkness, people were painting masterpieces in caves. While temperatures that would kill modern humans in hours raged outside, our ancestors were developing technologies we still use today. They weren't superhumans. They were exactly like us. Same bodies, same brains, same fears. The only difference? They had no choice but to adapt or die. And adaptation meant transformation so complete that it rewired our species forever. Every American alive today carries the genetic legacy of these Ice Age survivors. Your ability to store fat, Ice Age adaptation. Are you craving sweet and fatty foods? Ice Age survival mechanism. Your instinct to gather in groups during a crisis? Ice Age social programming. But the real miracle wasn't biological, it was psychological. These people faced a world where every sunrise might be their last, where children played in the shadows of creatures from nightmares, where winter lasted decades. And instead of giving up, they invented solutions that would echo through 30,000 years. The needle, the spear thrower, waterproof clothing, controlled fire, social health care, art that still moves us, music that still haunts us, stories that still define us. This is their story. The story of humans who faced Earth's most brutal challenge and won. Not through strength. They were the weakest predators in their ecosystem. Not through natural advantages. They lacked the fur, claws, and size of their competitors, but through something far more powerful, the absolute refusal to surrender. The day everything changed wasn't a single day. It was every day for 1,000 generations. Each morning, our ancestors woke to impossible odds. Each night, they survived another round with extinction. And somewhere in that daily battle between human will and cosmic indifference, modern humanity was born. The Hudson River didn't exist. Neither did Long Island Sound. In their place, a white wall of compressed ice stretched from horizon to horizon, groaning like a living thing as it crushed everything beneath its 2-mile thickness. If you stood where the Bronx would one day rise, you'd see nothing but an endless glacier face, blue-white and terrible, crackling with sounds that would haunt your nightmares. This was the Laurentide ice sheet at its maximum extent, and it had swallowed half of North America like a frozen tsunami moving in geological slow motion. But here's the detail that changes everything. Just 60 miles south, in what would become New Jersey, humans were building their lives. The archaeological evidence from Shawnee, Minisink, and other sites tells an impossible story. While Manhattan lay under ice thick enough to crush mountains, people were camping along the Delaware River. They were knapping stone tools, hunting caribou, gathering plants, and raising children in the shadow of a glacier that could have erased them in an instant. These weren't temporary hunting camps, they were homes. Fire hearths show repeated use over generations. Tool-making debris indicates teaching areas where elders passed knowledge to children. Bone fragments reveal diverse diets. These people weren't desperately scraping by. They were thriving at the edge of the apocalypse. The ice sheet created its own weather. Katabatic winds, gravity-driven rivers of frozen air, screamed down the glacier face at hurricane speeds, dropping temperatures by 30 degrees in seconds. These winds could literally freeze a human solid in minutes. Yet our ancestors learned to read the signs, to predict when these killing winds would come, to build shelters that could withstand them. Water was everywhere and nowhere. The ice locked up so much liquid that rainfall in the region dropped by 70%. Rivers ran low or disappeared entirely, but meltwater from the glacier's edge created seasonal torrents that could drown entire valleys in hours. Survival meant understanding these patterns, knowing when to approach the ice for fresh water and when to flee to higher ground. The landscape was schizophrenic. Tundra gave way to boreal forest within walking distance. A morning's hunt might start in Arctic conditions and end in temperate woodland. Animals adapted to completely different climates, mingled in ways that seem impossible today. Arctic foxes hunting beside deciduous forest deer, caribou grazing near turkey flocks. The humans who called this borderland home developed dual technologies: summer tools for forest hunting, winter tools for ice edge survival, clothing that could adapt from Arctic cold to temperate rain, shelters that could be rapidly modified as conditions changed. They weren't specialists, they were generalists in a world that demanded everything. Most remarkably, they maintained trade networks that stretched hundreds of miles. Stone tools made from Pennsylvania jasper appear in New York sites. Marine shells from the Atlantic coast are found inland. These people weren't isolated. They were connected, sharing information and resources across a landscape that would terrify modern mountaineers. Today, when construction crews dig deep in Manhattan, they sometimes hit bedrock scarred with parallel grooves, the signature of the ice sheet's grinding passage. Each mark represents centuries of pressure, the slow-motion violence of a continent being reshaped. But 60 miles south, in the shadows of that ice, our ancestors' signatures are different. Campfires, tools, irrefutable proof that even at the edge of an ice sheet that could flatten mountains, humans found a way forward. 40 degrees. That's not the wind chill. That's the actual air temperature recorded in ice cores from the American Midwest during the last glacial maximum. At that temperature, exposed human skin develops frostbite in under 5 minutes. Breathing can trigger pulmonary hemorrhaging as lung tissue freezes. Eyes can freeze shut permanently. Yet humans lived there, had babies there, and built entire cultures there. Dr. Jessica Tierney's groundbreaking research revealed the true horror. Global average temperatures were 11 degrees colder than today, but averages hide the extremes. Winter temperatures in what's now Wisconsin regularly hit 50 degrees. Summer highs in July might reach a balmy 32 degrees, freezing for maybe a week. The human body isn't designed for this. We're tropical apes who evolved in African heat. Our metabolic rate, our lack of fur, our long limbs that leak heat, everything about our physiology screams that we should have died instantly in Ice Age America. We're basically walking radiators in a world that demands perfect insulation. But our ancestors performed biological magic. They couldn't grow fur or develop antifreeze blood like Arctic fish. Instead, they hacked their own biology through behavior. They discovered that eating massive amounts of fat, up to 70% of their caloric intake, could boost their metabolic rate enough to survive extreme cold. They learned that sleeping in groups, pressed together like human furnaces, could maintain core temperatures through the longest nights. The archaeological evidence is stunning. Isotope analysis of human bones from Ice Age sites shows dietary adaptations that would horrify modern nutritionists, but were essential for survival. These people were consuming 5,000 to 8,000 calories per day, mostly from animal fat. Their bodies had become furnaces, burning fuel at rates that would kill modern humans through organ failure. Children faced the greatest challenge. Their small bodies lost heat faster than adults. A toddler in those temperatures would die in minutes without protection. Yet child burials from the period show most made it to adulthood. How? The answer lies in community innovation that seems impossible. Archaeologists found evidence of underground nurseries, chambers dug beneath living spaces where earth insulation and group body heat created microclimates 40 degrees Celsius warmer than the surface. Children literally lived underground for months, emerging only during the brief summer thaws. Entire generations grew up barely seeing the sun. The clothing technology was revolutionary, not just warm, but architecturally engineered. Multiple layers with dead air spaces, hoods designed to create breath-warming chambers, mittens attached with sinew cords so they couldn't be lost, because lost mittens meant lost fingers. Boots with grass insulation, changed daily to prevent moisture buildup that would freeze feet solid. Fire wasn't just important, it was existential. The hearths from this period show continuous burning for months, not hours or days, months. The fire never went out because relighting in those temperatures might be impossible. Archaeological sites show fire-tending rotations, with evidence that someone was always awake, always feeding the flames. Sleep deprivation was preferable to freezing. Even with all these adaptations, death was constant. Skeletal remains show widespread evidence of severe frostbite healing. Lost fingers and toes were common. Arthritis from cold damage appears in teenagers. Chronic respiratory infections from breathing supercooled air plagued everyone. But they endured. They even thrived. Art from this period shows not desperation but creativity. Tools show not just function but beauty. Burials show not abandonment but careful ceremony in temperatures that kill in minutes. They lived for decades in a cold that stops chemistry itself. They created culture. They took Earth's worst weather and made it home. The Yellowstone we know today, geysers, hot springs, and tourists, didn't exist. Instead, a mile-thick ice sheet had transformed America's wonderland into something from another planet. Where Old Faithful should have erupted, only crushing silence remained under frozen weight that had stopped even geological time. But travel south just 100 miles, and you'd find something that shouldn't exist, a paradise. Ice Age America was schizophrenic. While glaciers consumed the northern states, ice-free corridors created pockets of plenty that defy imagination. The Great Basin, now mostly desert, was a system of massive lakes teeming with fish. California's Central Valley, today's agricultural heartland, was a vast wetland where humans hunted giant beavers the size of black bears. These weren't random oases. They were refugia, biological arcs where life concentrated in impossible density. Fossil evidence from Utah's Lake Bonneville, now the Great Salt Lake, reveals an ecosystem that would shame modern Africa. Colombian mammoths, giant ground sloths, yesterday's camels, American lions, dire wolves, and saber-toothed cats all converged on these water sources, and watching from the shadows, planning their next move, were humans. The first Americans faced a unique challenge. Unlike their cousins in Europe, who'd had 40,000 years to learn Ice Age survival, these pioneers encountered everything simultaneously. They met their first mammoth, first saber-tooth, first giant bear, all while learning which plants wouldn't kill them and where water stayed liquid in winter. Paisley Caves in Oregon tells their story through the most humble evidence imaginable, fossilized human feces. These 1,400-300-year-old coprolites reveal a diet that would challenge survival experts today. Seeds from desert parsley, black locust, and prickly pear, protein from pocket gophers, rabbits, and mountain sheep. These people weren't just eating, they were experimenting, learning an entirely new continent's menu through trial and potentially fatal error. But the real American nightmare wasn't the cold or the predators, it was the unpredictability. Europe's ice age had patterns developed over millennia. America's climate was chaotic. The jet stream, disrupted by the Laurentide ice sheet, created weather that changed by the hour. Morning blizzards gave way to afternoon heat waves. Rivers froze and thawed without warning. A winter campsite could become a summer swamp overnight. Shasta ground sloth dung from Nevada caves reveals how extreme these swings were. Layers show tropical plants suddenly replaced by Arctic species, then back to tropical within single growing seasons. Animals and humans faced whiplash ecology, where adaptation strategies valid yesterday killed you today. The archaeological record shows how Americans innovated at breakneck speed. Clovis points, those beautifully fluted spearheads, appeared suddenly 13,000 years ago and spread across the continent in just 300 years. No gradual development, no regional variations at first. It's as if someone solved the how to kill American megafauna problem, and everyone instantly adopted it. Stay low. These people were also accidentally terraforming. Every mammoth killed meant tons of vegetation uneaten. Every fire set for hunting changed grassland to forest. Within just 2,000 years of significant human presence, North America's ecosystem transformed completely. The humans who arrived found one world. Their grandchildren inherited another, one their own ancestors had helped create. Most haunting are the failure sites, places where entire bands vanished, leaving tools mid-manufacture, meals half-eaten. The Olson Chubbuck site in Colorado preserves a bison hunt that went catastrophically wrong. 200 animals were driven off a cliff, but evidence suggests the hunters never returned to claim them. Something happened. We'll never know what. America's frozen nightmare wasn't just about temperature. It was about facing an entire continent that played by rules no human had learned, where every day brought new ways to die, and where survival meant inventing solutions faster than problems could kill you. October 15th, approximately 24,000 years ago. Location, what would become the shores of Lake Michigan. The temperature reached 60 C2 degrees, the warmest it would be for the next 4,000 years. Nobody knew it was the last warm day. How could they? The family gathering hackberries along the lakeshore had no idea they were living through a finale. The children splashing in the shallows, the grandmothers weaving baskets in the rare, warm sun, the hunters planning tomorrow's ambush. None suspected this was goodbye to the world they knew. Within 5 years, their lake would be solid ice. Within 50, their entire territory would be uninhabitable. Within 500, 2 meters of glacier would grind their campsites into geological memory. But on this last warm day, life felt eternal. The pollen record from lake sediments tells the story with heartbreaking precision. That autumn showed normal tree flowering, oaks, elms, and hickories producing their usual abundance. The next spring, 80% fewer flowers. The spring after that, the trees were dead. A tipping point had been crossed, invisible but irreversible. What makes this transition terrifying is its speed. Climate models show the final plunge into full glacial conditions happened in less than a human lifetime. People who learned to hunt in forests died in tundra. Children who played in meadows raised their own children on ice. The world didn't gradually cool. It fell off a thermal cliff. Animal bones from this transition period show progressive starvation. Growth rings in mammoth tusks narrow to paper-thin lines. Tooth wear indicates desperate browsing on bark and twigs never eaten before. Predator remains show increased cannibalism, dire wolves eating dire wolves, cave lions killing their own cubs. The ecosystem wasn't just dying, it was eating itself. But humans did something remarkable. They prepared. Archaeological evidence from the weeks after that last warm day shows frantic activity. Tool production increased 500%. Suddenly everyone was knapping points, scraping hides, preparing. Did they sense what was coming? Did migrating animals bring warning? Did the stars, the winds, the very air itself feel different? We find caches, hidden stores of finished tools, dried meat and materials dating exactly to this period. Not the casual storage of surplus, but the desperate hoarding of the warned. These people were battening down for something. They couldn't have known it would last 4,000 years, but they knew winter was coming. The last warm day sites show something else. Ceremony. Broken artifacts deliberately destroyed and buried. Hearths filled with offerings. Perfect tools, ornaments, food. Were they appealing to forces they hoped might stop what was starting, or saying goodbye to a world they somehow knew was ending? One detail breaks the heart: children's toys abandoned in place. A carved wooden horse in Illinois. A doll made of wrapped fibers in Iowa. Left behind as families fled south or deeper into sheltered valleys, the toys would wait 20,000 years for archaeologists to find them. Still, where laughing children dropped them on that last warm afternoon. Some bands headed south immediately, their movements traceable through distinctive tool styles, appearing suddenly at southern sites. Others stayed, determined or unable to move. Their fate is written in gradually thinning archaeological layers until they simply stop. But most adapted in place. They watched their warm world die and chose to learn the cold. On that last warm day, they were forest people. Within a generation, they'd become ice people, not through evolution, but through will. The last warm day wasn't dramatic. No asteroid impact, no volcanic eruption, just a pleasant October afternoon that happened to be the last of its kind for 4 millennia. Families gathered hackberries, children played, life continued, and then, quietly, without fanfare or notice, the warm world ended forever. Tomorrow would be colder, and tomorrow's tomorrow colder still, until cold was all anyone remembered, and warmth became a story grandparents told that no one quite believed. The teenagers were moving fast, too fast. Their footprints, preserved for 23,000 years in New Mexico's white gypsum sand, tell a story of pure terror. The stride length shows they were almost running. The toe impressions, dug deep, reveal someone carrying a heavy load. And the smaller prints alongside, a toddler, occasionally carried, occasionally walking, trying desperately to keep up. Behind them, offset by perhaps an hour, came prints that make archaeologists' blood run cold. A giant ground sloth had found their trail. This wasn't a fossil. These weren't ancient bones requiring imagination to reconstruct. These were footprints, moments of fear preserved with photographic clarity. Every slip in the mud, every stumble, every place where the teenager stopped to shift the toddler's weight on their hip. Frozen in time like a prehistoric security camera. The White Sands trackways, discovered in 2021, shattered everything we thought we knew about when humans reached America. These prints date to the last glacial maximum, the absolute worst of the Ice Age, when the ice-free corridor was supposedly closed, when survival should have been impossible. Yet, here was proof. Families with small children were already calling America home. The preservation is miraculous. Seeds of aquatic plants trapped in the footprints allowed precise radiocarbon dating. The moisture conditions were perfect, wet enough to capture the impression, dry enough to preserve it before the next flood. Layer after layer built up, creating a library of ancient human activity. One trackway shows a hunt in progress. Multiple adults converging on mammoth prints. Their paths reveal tactical thinking. They weren't following the mammoth. They were predicting where it would go, moving to intercept. The mammoth's prints show it detected them, veering sharply, increasing speed. The human prints scatter, regroup, continue the pursuit. But it's the children's prints that tell the most powerful story. Dozens of them, different sizes, suggesting ages from toddlers to adolescents. These weren't military expeditions or hunting parties. These were families, Complete communities with pregnant women identifiable by their distinctive gait, elderly individuals with irregular steps, and everywhere, the prints of playing children. One set of child prints makes archaeologists smile and cry simultaneously. The tracks show a child, maybe 6 years old, jumping in puddles, every puddle along a 200-meter stretch. The prints get deeper where they landed harder. Spacing shows increasing confidence. In the middle of the Ice Age, in a landscape stalked by giants, a child was doing what children do, finding joy in water and mud. The sloth prints tell another story. These giants, 12 feet tall when standing, usually avoided humans. But this one was following the teenager's trail. The sloth stopped where they stopped, circled where they had rested. Was it curious? Hunting? Protecting territory? The prints converge at a dried lake edge, and then nothing. The record stops. We'll never know how that confrontation ended. What we do know is this. 23,000 years ago, when science said humans couldn't possibly be in America, families were walking across New Mexico. They were raising children, hunting mammoths, avoiding predators, and yes, jumping in puddles. They weren't just surviving the impossible. They were living full lives in a landscape that would terrify us today. Every footprint is a signature. Every trackway has a story, and every story says the same thing. We were here. We were always here, earlier than anyone imagined, in conditions nobody thought survivable. American families were making their way home. She was 17, pregnant, and walking from Asia to Alaska. Not that she knew it was Asia or Alaska. To her, it was just the endless grass highway her grandmothers had walked, following the herds toward the place where the sun rose. Beringia wasn't a bridge. It was a continent. When sea levels dropped 400 feet, an expanse of land twice the size of Texas emerged between Siberia and Alaska. For 5,000 years, people didn't cross it. They lived on it, generation after generation, born on land that no longer exists, citizens of a country now drowned beneath the Bering Sea. The girl's DNA would tell the story 20,000 years later. Her descendants spread from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, all carry her genetic signature. Proof that the entire indigenous population of the Americas descended from a group of perhaps 2,000 people who spent millennia isolated on Beringia before the ice let them enter the New World. But Beringia wasn't empty ice. It was the Mammoth Steppe, Earth's most productive grassland. 1 square mile supported more large animals than modern Africa's richest game reserves. Mammoths, horses, bison, and caribou moved in herds so vast they took days to pass. Following them came the predators, massive short-faced bears, lions larger than any living today, and packs of dire wolves. And following everything came the humans. They weren't lost or desperate. Archaeological evidence from Yana River in Siberia shows sophisticated communities thriving at 17 north, 500 meters above the Arctic Circle. These people had mastered Arctic survival, tailored clothing that wouldn't be improved upon until the 20th century, portable homes that could withstand hurricane-force winds, and hunting strategies that let them take down 6-ton mammoths. The girl's people knew Beringia's rhythms. When the cotton grass bloomed, the caribou would move north. When Stella's sea eagles gathered, the salmon were running. When the ground squirrels emerged, spring had truly arrived. This knowledge, accumulated over centuries, was their map and calendar combined. But around 17,000 years ago, something changed. The ice sheets blocking entry to America began to crack. Coastal routes opened as glaciers retreated. The descendants of those who had waited on Beringia for millennia could finally move south. It wasn't an invasion or desperate flight. It was a continuation of what they'd always done, following the animals, finding new hunting grounds, raising children in new places. The pregnant girl probably gave birth somewhere in what's now Alaska. Her child would be among the first humans born in the Americas proper. That baby's descendants would spread across 2 continents in just 2,000 years, the fastest expansion in human history. Recent genetic studies reveal these pioneers split into 2 groups almost immediately. One headed down the Pacific coast, reaching Chile in perhaps just 1,000 years. The other moved inland, following the ice-free corridor between glaciers, becoming the ancestors of most North American indigenous peoples. But some stayed on Beringia, even as it began to flood. Rising seas turned their continent into islands, then tiny refuges, then nothing. The last Beringians watched their world drown beneath grey waves, taking with it the graves of 100 generations. Today, Bering Strait fishermen still pull up mammoth tusks in their nets, ivory black with age, polished smooth by currents, messages from a drowned continent. Reminders that beneath their boats lies an entire world. Grasslands where children played, rivers where women gathered plants, camps where stories were told through endless Arctic nights. The 17-year-old girl walking to Alaska didn't know she was making history. She was just following her family, her hand on her growing belly, wondering what kind of world her child would inherit. She could never have imagined all of it. All of America would be her child's inheritance. Interior Alaska, 18,000 years ago. The temperature was 68 degrees. Wildflowers carpeted valleys where glaciers should have been. Horses grazed beside camels, and humans were building permanent settlements in what should have been frozen wasteland. This was the Beringian refugium, nature's cruelest joke on our assumptions about the Ice Age. While the rest of North America lay buried under miles of ice, central Alaska remained mysteriously ice-free. The same mountain ranges that trap moisture today created a precipitation shadow during the Ice Age. No rain meant no snow. No snow meant no glaciers. While Chicago was under 2 miles of ice, Fairbanks was enjoying summers. The fossil record from Old Crow Basin in the Yukon reads like fantasy. Giant beavers the size of bears, American lions stalking through forests that shouldn't exist, camels, yes, camels, adapting to Alaska before humans ever rode them in Arabia. This wasn't Arctic survival. This was a temperate paradise hidden inside the Ice Age. For the humans who found it, Alaska was the promised land. Swan Point, one of America's oldest archaeological sites, shows continuous occupation for 14,000 years, not seasonal camps, permanent homes. These people weren't wandering. They'd found Eden and stayed. The technology they developed was revolutionary. Microliths, tiny stone razors that could be mass-produced and fitted into bone or wood handles. One core stone could produce dozens of identical blades. It was the Ice Age equivalent of interchangeable parts, invented 14,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. But the real innovation was social. These Alaskans created the first American trade networks. Obsidian from specific volcanoes appears hundreds of miles from its source. Amber from the coast reached the interior. Knowledge flowed along these trade routes, how to hunt different animals, where to find specific plants, when rivers would freeze or thaw. The children grew up bilingual or trilingual, learning the languages of trading partners. Marriage alliances connected bands across thousands of square miles. DNA evidence shows these populations maintained genetic diversity despite small numbers. They were actively avoiding inbreeding through sophisticated social networks. Then came the Younger Dryas, 12,900 years ago. The paradise froze overnight, not gradually, literally overnight in geological terms. Forests died standing, lakes froze solid and stayed frozen for 300 years. The horses, camels, and giant beavers vanished within a single human lifetime. But the humans stayed. Archaeological sites show a complete transformation in mere decades. Permanent houses were abandoned for portable shelters. Specialized hunting tools gave way to generalist equipment. Trade networks collapsed as each band focused on immediate survival. The Paradise generation watched their children inherit hell. One site tells the story in heartbreaking detail. A family group caught by the sudden cold, their campfire containing remains of the last meal, horse, their traditional prey. The next occupation layer, perhaps just years later, shows desperation, bird bones, mice, even insect remains. They were eating anything to survive, yet they endured. When the Younger Dryas ended and warmth returned, the descendants of paradise rebuilt. They'd kept the knowledge through the cold centuries where the good stone was, which plants were medicine, how to track animals that hadn't been seen in generations. Modern Alaskan natives carry this doubled heritage, genes from the paradise dwellers who knew abundance, culture from the survivors who endured when paradise died. Every tradition, every story, every piece of knowledge passed down represents someone who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Alaska was paradise once, then it was hell, then it was home. Then, the humans who lived through all three transformations created a template for survival that would define America. When the world changes, you change with it. When paradise ends, you build a new one. The ice-free corridor should have been humanity's highway into America. Instead, it was a 1,500-mile death trap that killed everything that entered it. Between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, a narrow passage opened around 15,000 years ago. On maps, it looks inviting, a clear path from Alaska to Montana. In reality, it was hell's own hallway. Katabatic winds, screaming off both ice sheets, created a permanent hurricane. Temperatures swung 60 degrees in hours. Flash floods from glacial melting could fill the entire corridor in minutes, then vanish, leaving alkali mud that poisoned anything it touched. Dr. Ben Potter's excavations along the corridor route found something chilling. Nothing. No tools, no bones, no evidence of life for thousands of years after it opened. The corridor existed, but it was biological death. Even bacteria struggled to survive there. The first humans to attempt it left a single clue. A broken spear point embedded in glacial till, carried miles from where it was dropped. Someone had tried to cross and failed so completely that only geology remembered their attempt. But people kept trying. They had to. Behind them, Beringia was drowning. Ahead lay an entire continent. The only path was through the corridor of death. We know someone succeeded because genetics proves humans reached southern Alberta by 13,000 years ago. But how? The answer came from studying the one animal that thrived in the corridor: ravens. These birds could fly above the killing winds, scout ahead for dangers, and most importantly, lead humans to carcasses. Following ravens became the survival strategy. Where ravens circled, something had died. Where something died, there was temporary food. Where there was food, humans could survive another day. The corridor wasn't crossed, it survived, one carrion meal at a time. The psychological toll must have been devastating. Imagine walking between walls of ice 2 miles high, knowing that any weather change could kill your entire family. The acoustic properties of the corridor amplified sounds: ice cracking, rock falls, wind howling like a living thing. One archaeological site at Charlie Lake Cave shows the aftermath. The first humans to exit the corridor left offerings: perfect tools deliberately broken, valuable obsidian buried unused. Were they thanking spirits for survival or trying to ensure others wouldn't follow them through hell? The physical evidence shows these corridor survivors were changed. Isotope analysis of bones reveals radical dietary shifts from maritime proteins to terrestrial ones in a single generation. Their teeth show stress markers, indicating severe malnutrition during childhood. These people had been broken down and rebuilt by their passage, but they'd also been selected. Only the strongest, smartest, and luckiest survived the corridor. The humans who emerged into lower North America were the ultimate survivors, carrying genes and knowledge tested in Earth's harshest crucible. Every Native American today descends from someone who walked through hell and lived. The corridor remained hostile for another 2,000 years. Even after vegetation appeared, it was toxic. Salt-adapted plants, poisonous to humans, water sources contaminated with glacial flour that caused fatal mineral imbalances. The few who used it later stayed only at the edges, darting in for specific resources, then fleeing back to safety. By the time the corridor became truly passable around 11,000 years ago, humans had already spread throughout the Americas via coastal routes. The death trap that was supposed to be humanity's highway had forced us to become seafarers instead, fundamentally changing how our species colonized the New World. Today, driving through Alberta, you can still see the corridor's ghost. The landscape is scarred, different from surrounding areas. Plants grow differently, animals avoid certain zones. The earth itself remembers the corridor of death. The baby was born in December, 13,800 years ago, in what would become Montana. Outside the shelter, the temperature was -30 degrees. Inside, pressed against her mother's skin, wrapped in the fur of animals her parents had killed, she was the first of her family line to be American-born. She would live exactly 18 months. We know her story because her parents loved her enough to bury her with their most precious possessions. The Anzac site preserved not just her remains, but 125 stone tools covered in red ochre, arranged with care that transcends millennia. This wasn't just a burial, it was a statement. Our child mattered, our grief matters, we matter. That first winter in America broke people in ways Beringia never had. In Beringia, they'd had generations to adapt. Here, everything was new. Which plants killed you, which healed, where animals are sheltered, where do they hunt, when rivers froze solid, when they became death traps of rotten ice. Every decision was a guess, and wrong guesses killed. The archaeological record from early American sites shows a heartbreaking pattern. Multiple burials of infants and children, far more than normal mortality rates. These first American generations were paying in blood for every lesson learned. The knowledge that would keep their descendants alive for 13,000 years was being written in small graves. But they learned fast. Within a single generation, they developed the Clovis toolkit. Stone technology so advanced it wouldn't be improved upon for millennia. These weren't incremental improvements on Asian tools. They were revolutionary designs created specifically for American animals and landscapes. The speed of innovation suggests desperation driving genius. Winter was coming, it was always coming, and what worked in Siberia failed in Montana. Projectile points had to be redesigned for animals with different bone density. Clothing patterns that worked for dry cold failed in wet cold. Shelter designs that stood against northern winds collapsed under prairie blizzards. That first winter, they ate things that would have disgusted their parents. Pack rats cached by the dozens, grasshoppers gathered from frozen swarms, tree bark boiled until it released minimal calories. The isotope signatures in their bones show starvation, recovery, starvation again, a metabolic roller coaster that killed the weak and aged the strong. But they also discovered American abundance, rivers so thick with salmon you could walk across on their backs, valleys where bison gathered in thousands, forests where turkeys roosted in flocks of hundreds. Those who survived the first winter would feast in spring. The baby who died at 18 months was buried at winter's end. Pollen in the grave suggests early spring flowers. Her DNA reveals she was directly ancestral to 80% of all indigenous Americans. Every triumph and tragedy of Native history flowed through her tiny body. She didn't live to see her second spring, but her family did, and their families did, and theirs. The tools buried with her weren't random. They were unused, perfect, made specifically for the burial. In a world where every working stone meant survival, they buried a fortune with a toddler, Because even in that first terrible winter, even while learning lethal lessons daily, they maintained what made them human: love that transcends death. That winter ended eventually. Spring came, as it always does. The survivors emerged, changed, leaner, harder, wiser. They were no longer Asian immigrants. That first winter had transformed them into Americans. The tusks crossed 3 feet from Sarah's tent. Every morning for 6 years, she'd watched the family group pass at exactly the same time, following a trail worn smooth by 10,000 years of mammoth traffic. She knew them individually. The matriarch with the broken tusk, the nervous adolescent who always lagged behind, the baby who'd been born the same spring as her own son. This wasn't the Pleistocene. This was 11,700 years ago in Pennsylvania, and humans had been living alongside mammoths for so long that neither species considered it remarkable. The archaeological evidence from Shawnee Minisink tells this story of casual coexistence. Mammoth bones and human artifacts intermixed in the same layers, but not from hunting. These were natural deaths and human camps overlapping by chance. Cut marks on bones show occasional scavenging, but not systematic killing. For generations, humans and mammoths were neighbors, not predator and prey. Children grew up thinking mammoths were as permanent as mountains. They played in mammoth walls after the giants moved on. They collected shed mammoth hair for insulation. They knew which matriarch tolerated a close approach and which would charge. This knowledge, passed parent to child, made coexistence possible. The mammoths knew humans too. Isotope analysis of mammoth tusks shows they altered their migration routes to avoid human settlements, but didn't abandon territories entirely. They learned human hunting patterns, avoiding valleys during certain seasons, approaching water sources at times humans rarely visited. It was negotiated coexistence, both species adapting to share space. But around 11,000 years ago, the relationship changed. Climate warming was accelerating. The vast grasslands mammoths needed were fragmenting into forests. Human populations were growing. Competition for resources intensified. The neighbors were becoming rivals. Sarah's grandchildren would be the last generation to live with mammoths. By the time they had their own children, the giants would exist only in memory and paint on cave walls. The speed of extinction was breathtaking, from common to gone in perhaps 200 years. The last mammoths in the continental United States died confused. Their traditional migration routes were blocked by forests. Their watering holes were claimed by humans. Their food sources were eaten by bison and horses. They wandered erratically, searching for the world they'd known, finding only change. One juvenile mammoth skeleton from Michigan tells the saddest story. It died at age 15, adolescent for a mammoth, with partially healed spear wounds. Humans had hunted it, failed to kill it, and it had survived for months before dying of infection. Its tusks show stress lines from those final months. Malnutrition, disease, isolation. It died alone, the last of its kind in that region. Sarah lived to be elderly by Ice Age standards, perhaps 45. She would have remembered the mammoth highways of her childhood and lived to see them empty. The silence where trumpeting once echoed, the absence of the earth-shaking footfalls that had been the soundtrack of her youth. Her great-grandchildren wouldn't believe her stories. Hairy elephants taller than trees, herds that took days to pass. Impossible, but Sarah had touched them. She'd watched mammoth mothers teach babies to use their trunks. She'd seen bulls fight during musts, their tusks crashing like thunder. She'd fallen asleep to their nighttime rumblings, a sound that meant safety because it meant the world was normal. The mammoth next door wasn't mythology or prey. It was a neighbor whose mail you'd collect while they were away, a fixture so permanent its absence was unimaginable. Until one day, imaginable was all it was. The prints in the mud told the story. Small human footprints, maybe a 6-year-old running behind them, following the exact path, the distinctive round paws of Smilodon fatalis. The saber-toothed cat had found the easiest prey of all, a human child separated from the group. La Brea tar pits preserved this horror in asphalt, not bones this time, but behavior. The child had escaped. Their prints continue past the tar seep that would have trapped a pursuing predator. But the evidence is clear. 12,000 years ago, saber-toothed cats actively hunted human children. Dr. Blair van Valkenburg's analysis of Smilodon remains reveals why children were perfect prey. Adult humans were too large, too cooperative, too dangerous. But a 40-pound child? That was exactly the size Smilodon evolved to kill. Their 7-inch sabers could pierce a child's skull or ribcage in one bite. Death would be instant. The archaeological record supports this nightmare. At multiple sites, child remains show puncture wounds, consistent with saber teeth spacing. Always children under 10, always killed away from camp, always partially consumed. Smilodon ate what it could and abandoned the rest. Typical cat behavior. Parents developed desperate strategies. Children were never alone, ever. Toddlers were physically tied to adults with leather cords. Older children traveled in groups, always with adult oversight. The freedom of childhood didn't exist when 7-inch fangs waited in every shadow. One site in California preserved a parent's worst nightmare and greatest triumph, a child's skeleton showing healed Smilodon bite marks on the shoulder. Somehow, an adult had intervened during an attack, fought off a saber-toothed cat, and saved the child. The healing shows months of care afterward. This 7-year-old survived what should have been certain death, but survival came with psychological scars we can only imagine. Every rustle in the grass, every shadow, every moment of separation from adults would trigger panic. These children grew up with PTSD as their default state. The constant vigilance required to keep children alive exhausted entire communities. Smilodon knew human patterns. They hunted near water sources at dawn and dusk when families were distracted by daily tasks. They waited near latrine areas where children might wander alone. They learned that human scream calls brought more humans, so they developed silent killing techniques, suffocating children without a sound. The response was architectural. Camps were redesigned with children's safety paramount. Central protected areas surrounded by thorn barriers. Elevated platforms where children could play under constant observation. Noise-making devices that children wore to prevent silent stalking. Survival meant redesigning society around protecting the young. By 10,000 years ago, Smilodon was extinct. Climate change and prey loss contributed, but humans played a role. Every cave that might shelter cats was claimed or destroyed. Every carcass that might feed them was burned or buried. This wasn't hunting, it was systematic habitat destruction targeting a specific predator. The last Smilodon fatalis died in California approximately 10,000 years ago. It was young, malnourished, with broken teeth from trying to eat bones, desperation feeding when normal prey vanished. It died alone, the last of a lineage that had terrorized human children for millennia. Modern parents worry about screen time and stranger danger. Ice Age parents worried about 7-inch fangs and silent death. Every child who survived to adulthood was a victory against odds we can't fathom. Every adult was someone who'd spent their childhood as prey. The saber-toothed cats are gone, but in our amygdala, in our instinctive protection of children, in our fear of things that hunt in darkness, they live on. We are the descendants of children who survived being hunted by monsters. That survival required vigilance that became encoded in our genes. When modern parents feel irrational fear for their children's safety, they're feeling an echo of when that fear was perfectly rational, when it kept children alive, when saber-tooths hunted children, and children sometimes got away. The claw mark started 8 feet up the cave wall and gouged upward to 14 feet. Whatever made them had reached higher than any ladder the humans possessed. This was their first indication that the cave wasn't empty. Something massive lived in the darkness beyond their torchlight. It was Arctodus simus, the giant short-faced bear. And at 2,100 pounds, with legs longer than a horse's, it was North America's apex predator. One had claimed this cave, and the human family that had sheltered here during a blizzard was about to become its breakfast. The forensic evidence from dozens of sites tells the same story. Humans and giant bears competed for the same caves, and humans usually lost. Skeletal remains show blunt force trauma consistent with bear paws that could generate 2,000 pounds of force per strike. One blow could decapitate an adult human, but these bears weren't just powerful, they were smart. Dr. Paul Mathias's research revealed Arctodus had the highest brain-to-body ratio of any bear species. They could remember individual humans, hold grudges, and plan ambushes. They learned human patterns and exploited them. One archaeological site in Nebraska preserved a teaching moment. Adult human footprints circle around child prints, with Arctodus tracks on the periphery. The humans were teaching children how to identify and avoid bear signs, while a bear watched them from a safe distance. Everyone knew everyone was there. It was a cold war of mutual surveillance. The bear's speed made them particularly terrifying. Despite weighing a ton, Arctodus could run 40 miles per hour, faster than any human, faster than horses, sustainable for miles. Running triggered their chase instinct. The only survival strategy was to stand ground and appear larger. Impossible advice when facing a bear that stood 12 feet tall on hind legs. Caves were the primary battleground. Humans needed caves for winter survival. Arctodus needed them for hibernation. Every autumn became a deadly game of cave chess. Humans developed elaborate protocols, sending scouts, using smoke to check depths, creating noise walls to detect occupants. Still, mistakes were fatal. One family's solution, preserved at Paisley Caves in Oregon, was ingenious. They built a secondary wall inside the cave mouth, creating an airlock system. If a bear was inside, they had a barrier. If a bear arrived while they were inside, they had a warning. The construction required moving tons of rock, but it worked. That family survived multiple winters. The giant bear problem shaped human settlement patterns. Sites from this period cluster in areas with poor bear habitat, open plains with no caves, wetlands where bears couldn't den, altitude zones above the bear line. Humans were being zoned out of prime real estate by two-ton landlords, but around 11,000 years ago, the tables turned. Climate change reduced the bear's prey. Human hunting pressure on the same prey intensified competition. Most critically, humans developed a new weapon: dogs. Pack dogs could harass bears, track them, warn of their approach. The bear's advantage in single combat meant nothing against coordinated pack hunting. The last Arctodus died confused and hungry. Their world of plenty had become a world of scarcity. The caves they dominated for millennia were filled with smoke and humans. The prey they'd hunted was gone, or protected by human hunters. They were ecological kings, dethroned by clever apes and climate change. One final detail. At Huntington Reservoir in Utah, archaeologists found a child's toy, a carved wooden bear, anatomically accurate to Arctodus, not modern bears. Some child's parents had carved their nightmare into a plaything, perhaps hoping familiarity would breed less fear. The toy was clutched in small hand bones, buried with a 5-year-old who didn't live to see a world without giant bears. Today's 600-pound grizzlies are considered massive. Arctodus was 3 times that size. Every American alive today descends from someone who shared a continent with bears that could look into second-story windows. We survived them through intelligence, cooperation, and sheer audacity in claiming their caves as our homes. The claw marks on the human skull told one story. The peaceful plant remains in the ground, sloth stomach told another. Somewhere between these two pieces of evidence lay the truth about Megatherium, the 12-foot-tall, 4-ton ground sloth that humans desperately wanted to believe was harmless. Thomas Jefferson thought they still lived in the American West. He was wrong by 11,000 years. But he was right about one thing: these creatures defied every assumption about plant eaters being peaceful. Those claws, up to 20 inches long and sharp as scythes, weren't for gathering vegetables. The evidence from Quebrada Jaguar in Peru changed everything. Human remains, with parallel gouges spaced exactly like Megatherium claws. The bone showing defensive wounds on the arms where someone tried to block the child's skeleton, found 30 feet away, thrown with force only a multi-ton animal could generate. This wasn't a gentle giant. This was a killer when provoked. Dr. Gerardo de Julius's biomechanical analysis revealed the truth. Ground sloths were built like tanks with switchblades. Their claws could generate 3,000 pounds of force in a swipe. Their reach exceeded 15 feet. They could pivot on their powerful tails and strike faster than their bulk suggested. Herbivore didn't mean harmless, but most of the time they were peaceful. Coprolite analysis, fossilized dung, shows a diet of leaves, fruits, and grasses. They spent 18 hours a day eating, processing huge quantities of vegetation with their grinding teeth. Humans and ground sloths coexisted peacefully for thousands of years, until they didn't. The problem was territory and resources. Ground sloths needed specific plants that also provided humans with food and medicine. They required caves for shelter that humans wanted for homes. They visited water sources on schedules that conflicted with human needs. Coexistence required negotiation, and ground sloths didn't negotiate. Children were particularly vulnerable. A ground sloth might tolerate adults at a distance, but saw running children as threats. Their poor eyesight meant they reacted to movement more than shape. A playing child could trigger a defensive response that ended in tragedy. One archaeological site in Brazil preserved a teaching moment: adult human footprints surrounding juvenile sloth tracks, with child footprints kept carefully distant. Parents were showing children how close was too close, how to read sloth body language, when to run and when to freeze. The most remarkable evidence comes from cave paintings. Humans drew ground sloths accurately, but added details: raised hair, bared teeth, extended claws that only appeared during threat displays. These weren't nature sketches. They were warning signs, survival guides painted on stone. By 11,000 years ago, ground sloths faced extinction. Climate change eliminated their food sources. Human hunting increased as easier prey disappeared. But the final blow might have been psychological. Ground sloths were intelligent enough to experience stress, and constant human pressure created chronic anxiety that affected breeding. The last ground sloths died in Caribbean islands, isolated from mainland populations. They'd shrunk over generations, island dwarfism, reducing them to merely cow-sized instead of elephant-sized. Even at reduced size, they terrified the humans who finally found them around 4,000 years ago. One Cuban cave preserved the end. Human and ground sloth remains intermixed, both showing violence markers. The humans had won, barely. The ground sloths had fought to extinction rather than submit. Neither species emerged victorious from that cave. Were ground sloths gentle giants or killers? They were both. Peaceful herbivores 99% of the time, devastating killers when threatened. Humans learned to live with that duality for millennia, reading moods in creatures that could end them with one swipe. Every successful interaction was a negotiation between species that couldn't communicate except through distance and respect. Every failure was written in claw marks on bone. We survived not by conquering ground sloths, but by understanding them. The wolf was dying. Its pack had abandoned it after the failed caribou hunt left it with a shattered rear leg. Now it lay at the edge of the human camp's firelight, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to escape if threatened. The child, who'd been sneaking at meat scraps for 3 days, watched from behind her mother's legs. This scene, or something like it, played out around 23,000 years ago somewhere in Siberia. We know because the archaeological record suddenly shows something unprecedented: wolf bones with healed injuries that would have been fatal in the wild. Someone was caring for wolves. The first dogs weren't bred, they were selected by desperation. Wolves that approached human camps were the outliers, less aggressive, more curious, probably omega animals driven from their packs. Humans who tolerated them were outliers too, those willing to share precious calories with another species during the Ice Age. Dr. Angela Perry's analysis of ancient dog remains reveals these early relationships were mutual adoption, not domestication. Wolves chose humans as much as humans chose wolves. The benefits were immediate. Wolves got food and fire. Humans got warning systems and hunting partners, but the child sneaking food to the injured wolf was doing something more profound. She was beginning a relationship that would fundamentally alter both species. Within 1,000 years, the descendants of that wolf wouldn't be wolves anymore. They'd be something new: dogs. The transformation was rapid and dramatic. Skulls became smaller and rounder, teeth reduced in size, ears flopped instead of standing erect. Most remarkably, they developed facial muscles that wolves lack, muscles that let them raise their inner eyebrows, creating the puppy dog eyes that trigger human nurturing instincts. These weren't cosmetic changes. Dog brains developed enhanced abilities to read human gestures and emotions. They could follow a pointed finger, something wolves can't do. They could interpret human facial expressions. They barked, a behavior rare in adult wolves but universal in dogs. Dogs revolutionized hunting. They could track wounded prey for days. They could corner dangerous animals until humans arrived. They could carry supplies, pull sleds, guard camps. One analysis suggests dogs increased hunting success rates by 56%. In the Ice Age, that advantage meant survival. But the most profound change was social. Dogs gave humans something we'd never had: complete loyalty from another species. Wolves cooperate within their pack. Dogs expanded their pack to include humans, offering unconditional devotion that transcended species boundaries. The girl who fed the injured wolf grew up with its descendants. Her children were raised alongside puppies. By the time she was elderly, dogs were so integrated into human society that life without them was unimaginable. They slept with children, providing warmth. They cleaned wounds with antibacterial saliva. They ate human waste, reducing disease. Not all relationships succeeded. Multiple archaeological sites show wolf-dog remains with embedded human weapons. Some attempted domestications failed catastrophically. The line between wolf and dog remained blurry and dangerous for generations. The last fully wolf population to become dogs probably happened around 15,000 years ago. After that, all dogs descended from already domesticated animals. The window for creating dogs from wolves had closed. The two species had diverged too far to bridge again. That dying wolf at the edge of the firelight didn't know it was about to become the ancestor of every dog on Earth. The child sneaking it food didn't know she was participating in the greatest partnership in human history. They were just two young mammals, both scared, both hungry, both deciding to trust. 23,000 years later, 900 million dogs share the planet with humans. They guide our blind, comfort our sick, protect our homes, and love us with devotion that defies evolutionary logic. All because one child couldn't watch a wolf die alone. The wolves that became dogs didn't just change species, they changed us. They taught us that loyalty could transcend genetics, that love could cross species boundaries, that the scariest predator could become the gentlest companion. In becoming dogs, wolves achieved something remarkable. They survived the Ice Age not through strength or speed, but through friendship. And in accepting them, humans discovered we were capable of love beyond our own kind. The spear weighed 8 pounds in the hands of the 17-year-old who'd crafted it. It felt like holding lightning. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment, standing 50 feet from a lone mammoth bull, separated from his herd, injured from a mating fight, vulnerable for the first time in his 12-ton life. This was 13,000 years ago, near what would become Naco, Arizona. The boy, we'll call him Marcus, was about to attempt what no one in his band had ever done: kill a mammoth alone. The archaeological evidence from Naco preserves this moment with cinematographic clarity. 8 Clovis points embedded in a single mammoth skeleton, all from the same craftsman's hand, identifiable by distinctive flaking patterns. This wasn't a group hunt. This was individual human will against impossible odds. Marcus had studied mammoths since childhood. He knew their blind spot was directly behind, where their eyes couldn't track. He knew wounded bulls isolated themselves to heal. He knew the precise spot between the ribs where a spear could reach the heart, a target the size of a dinner plate on an animal the size of a house. The first throw had to count. A wounded mammoth could run 25 miles per hour, could trumpet a call that brought the herd, could turn and charge, transforming the hunter into paste. Marcus had seen his uncle crushed 3 winters ago, pressed into mud so deep they never recovered the body. But his band was starving. The mild winter had confused migration patterns. Smaller game had vanished. 32 people, including his infant sister, needed protein. A single mammoth could feed them for 2 months. The math was simple. His life against 32, not a choice, a responsibility. The moment stretched like sinew. Wind shifted, carrying his scent toward the mammoth. The giant's trunk rose, testing air. Recognition dawned in ancient eyes. This wasn't another scavenger. This was dangerous. The mammoth turned, preparing to charge. Marcus threw. The spear flew true, striking exactly where ribs separated. The mammoth screamed, a sound that carried 5 miles, that would haunt Marcus's dreams forever. But it didn't charge. It stood, swaying, blood darkening its fur. The second spear followed, then the third. The mammoth took 7 steps toward him. Marcus held his ground, 4th spear raised. Their eyes met, predator and prey. Except Marcus wasn't sure which was which. The mammoth's front legs buckled. It fell forward, driving the spears deeper. The ground shook. Birds 500 feet away took flight. Then silence. Marcus approached carefully. Mammoths could play dead, but this one's eyes had already glazed. Blood pooled, steaming in cold air. The impossible had happened. A single human had killed Earth's largest land animal. The story should end in triumph. It doesn't. Marcus collapsed, sobbing, not from relief, but from something deeper. He'd looked into those ancient eyes and seen intelligence die, felt the ground shake with ended existence. The mammoth had lived perhaps 60 years, survived ice ages, raised young, mourned dead, and Marcus had ended it with sharpened stone. His band found him 3 hours later, still sitting beside the carcass, spear in hand, tears frozen on his cheeks. They celebrated. He didn't. The first mammoth kill was humanity's greatest triumph and greatest loss of innocence. We could kill giants. The question Marcus spent his remaining 40 years trying to answer was, should we? The skeleton shocked the archaeologists into silence. Buried 9,000 years ago in Peru's Andes Mountains, surrounded by a complete hunting toolkit, spear points, an atlatl, scraping tools, lay a teenager. Analysis of the pelvis revealed the truth that shattered assumptions. This was a young woman, and she'd been a big game hunter. Her name is lost, but her story survives in bone and stone. She died at 19, her remains showing the wear patterns of someone who'd thrown spears thousands of times. Her right shoulder showed the characteristic development of lateral use. Her teeth held traces of dried meat, consistent with a hunting lifestyle. She wasn't an exception. She was the rule. Dr. Randy Haas's comprehensive study revealed that 30 to 50% of Ice Age American hunters were women, not gatherers who occasionally hunted not support crew, but frontline giant killers who faced down mastodons and giant ground sloths with the same courage as their male counterparts. The evidence had always been there, ignored by assumptions. Female skeletons with hunting injuries, women buried with projectile points, cave art showing figures with breasts throwing spears. We just hadn't wanted to see it. Sarah Thompson lived 11,000 years ago in what's now Wyoming. We're giving her a modern name, but she was real. Her remains tell an extraordinary story. Healed fractures consistent with mammoth trampling, isotope analysis showing a diet of primarily giant game meat, buried with 27 perfectly crafted spear points, a fortune in stone tools, marking her as a master hunter. But here's what makes Sarah special. She was also a mother. Pelvic scarring shows at least 3 births. She hunted giants while raising children. The logistics seem impossible until you realize Ice Age society was built on communal child rearing. While Sarah stalked mammoths, her sisters nursed her baby. When they hunted, she watched their children. Women had advantages in giant hunting that we're only now understanding. Lower center of gravity meant better balance when throwing. Higher body fat percentages meant better survival during extended hunts. Most importantly, different risk assessment. Men often attacked head-on. Women developed persistence hunting, wounding prey and tracking it for days until it collapsed. One kill site in Colorado preserves feminine innovation. The mammoth was killed not by spear thrusts, but by dozens of small puncture wounds. Someone had developed poison arrows, likely from prairie root toxins that cause slow paralysis. Less dramatic than spearing, but safer and more certain. The innovation spread rapidly, suggesting women's hunting networks shared information. The social dynamics were complex. Mixed-gender hunting parties required trust beyond modern comprehension. When facing a charging ground sloth, you needed absolute certainty that everyone would hold their ground. Gender didn't matter. Courage did. Children grew up seeing their mothers kill giants. One burial in Nevada included a 6-year-old girl with a miniature atlatl and practice points. She was learning to hunt from someone. The wear patterns on the tools suggest years of use. This wasn't play. It was an apprenticeship. The last women mammoth hunters lived as the giants died. They'd helped drive extinction, then faced a world without the prey that defined them. Some adapted to smaller games. Others hung up their spears. The tradition of women hunting giants ended not because society changed, but because the giants were gone. Sarah Thompson's descendants wouldn't know she'd hunted mammoths. Within 3 generations, the story shifted. Women became gatherers in the retelling. Men became the hunters. The truth lay buried with 27 spear points, waiting 9,000 years for someone to notice that half the giant killers had been giant killers who also gave birth. The screaming started before dawn, not human screams, mammoth. Dozens of them, trapped in a pit they hadn't seen until Earth gave way beneath their feet. 15,000 years ago at Tultepec in Mexico, humans had engineered mass murder on a scale that would make modern slaughterhouses efficient. The trap was architectural genius born from desperation. 25 meters wide, 6 meters deep, walls angled inward to prevent climbing. It had taken 300 people 6 months to dig, working with stone tools and wooden shovels. Every basketful of earth carried away was an investment in speculative death. But the engineering was just beginning. The trap's floor held sharpened stakes, fire-hardened and poisoned with dart frog secretions. The walls were lined with smooth clay that became slippery when wet. The approach was camouflaged with woven mats covered in dirt, strong enough for one mammoth, but designed to collapse under a herd. The killing field above was equally planned. Channels dug in specific patterns would funnel panicked herds toward the trap. Fire positions were prepared upwind. Escape routes for humans were cleared and marked. This wasn't hunting, this was industrial execution. The matriarch sensed something wrong. Her 60 years of experience screamed warnings as her family group approached the water source. But the drought lasted 2 seasons. Her grand calves were weakening. The water smelled real because it was. The humans had diverted a stream to bait their trap. When the ground collapsed, physics became destiny. 14 mammoths fell in seconds. Adults landed on juveniles, tusks pierced bodies, legs shattered. The stakes did their work, puncturing abdomens and feet. The poison caused paralysis within minutes. The strongest died first, their mass working against them. The humans waited 3 days. No rush. Let gravity and poison do the work. Let the screaming stop. Let the giants understand their fate. When they finally approached, only 2 juveniles still lived, their eyes holding understanding that transcended species. They knew this was deliberate, knew they'd been murdered by minds that could imagine future death. The butchering took weeks. Every scrap of meat, hide, bone, and ivory was processed. Archaeologists found cut marks showing systematic dismemberment. This wasn't frenzied feeding, but careful resource extraction. They dried meat on racks, rendered fat in ceramic vessels, and stacked bones for future toolmaking. But the trap claimed human lives too. One skeleton, a middle-aged woman, was found among the mammoths. She'd fallen during construction or checking. Her bones showed she'd lived for days after the fall, probably calling for help that never came. The trap didn't discriminate. The success was too complete. The local mammoth population, already stressed by climate change, couldn't recover from losing 14 reproductive adults. Within a century, no mammoths remained within 50 miles. The trap that ensured one winter's survival guaranteed future starvation. The Tultepec trap was used only once. The investment versus return didn't justify repetition. Or perhaps the builders recognized what they'd done, crossed a line from hunting to extermination. The trap was deliberately filled, hidden, forgotten, until construction workers found it in 2019. Modern visitors to the Tultepec Museum see reconstructed skeletons arranged as they fell, families together in death. They don't see the 3 days of screaming, don't smell the poison working through nervous systems, don't hear the juveniles calling for mothers already dead. The trap at Tultepec worked perfectly. That perfection marked the beginning of humanity's transition from participant in nature to its destroyer. We'd learned to kill not just individuals, but entire populations. The mammoths in that pit weren't hunted. They were executed by a species that had discovered engineering could replace courage. The blood trail led straight to the cliff. Below, on rocks 200 feet down, lay the broken bodies of 8 humans and 2 wounded mammoths, still alive, trumpeting in agony. This was the Olson Chubbuck site 10,000 years ago, and everything that could go wrong had. The plan had been simple: drive a mammoth family group toward the cliff using fire and noise. At the last moment, the humans would split aside, letting momentum carry the giants over. It had worked before. It should have worked again. But the matriarch was a survivor of previous hunts. She recognized the pattern: smoke upwind, humans spreading in a crescent, the push towards dangerous ground. At the cliff edge, instead of going over, she pivoted, 12 tons spinning on a biological turntable. Her family followed. The hunters, running full speed behind them, couldn't stop. Marcus Reed went over first, a name we're assigning to real bones. His skeleton shows he tried to stop, heel marks dug into earth, arms thrown backward. Physics won. He fell alive, conscious, probably screaming. Death came from impact, but not instantly. His bones show he lived long enough to attempt crawling before internal bleeding ended him. Behind Marcus came his brother, his nephew, 2 cousins, a family hunting party becoming a family grave. Each tried to stop. Each failed. Momentum is merciless. But the mammoths hadn't escaped clean. 2 juveniles, confused in the chaos, had gone over. They landed on the humans who'd driven them, creating a sandwich of species-wide tragedy. One juvenile's leg bones show compound fractures. It lived 3 days on that ledge, calling for a mother who stood at the cliff top, unable to descend, unwilling to leave. The remaining humans faced an impossible choice. 8 of their band lay dead or dying below. The wounded mammoths were valuable, tons of meat, ivory, hide, but recovering either meant technical climbing with Stone Age equipment. They tried. Sarah Winters, another assigned name, real person, volunteered to descend on woven grass ropes. Halfway down, the rope failed. She fell 40 feet, landing on her dead husband. Her skeleton shows she survived the fall, but died from exposure overnight. Her hand bones were found interlocked with his. She'd spent her last hours holding his corpse. The band gave up. 8 humans and 2 mammoths were left to rot in place, too dangerous to recover. The survivors left and never returned. The site remained untouched for 10,000 years, preserving the worst day in one band's existence. But the tragedy spread wider. This band had been the primary hunters for 3 allied groups. Without them, 150 people faced starvation. The failed hunt triggered migrations, conflicts over remaining resources, and social collapse. One bad day echoed through generations. The psychological impact was devastating. Survivors developed what we'd now recognize as PTSD. One woman, identified through isotope analysis as being present at the hunt, never ate mammoth again. Her bones showed a dietary shift to small game and plants. She lived 20 more years, refusing the meat that reminded her of the screaming. The mammoths remembered too. That matriarch who'd recognized the trap lived another decade. Wherever she encountered humans, she charged immediately. No warning, no threat display, instant violence. She'd learned humans meant death and taught her family this lesson through aggressive examples. The cliff became taboo. 3 generations of humans avoided it, leaving offerings at safe distances. Stories evolved. The cliff was cursed, haunted by mammoth spirits hungry for human blood. The truth was simpler and sadder. It was a monument to how quickly triumph becomes tragedy when hunting giants. Her name was Lonely. The humans who watched her for 3 summers called her that because she trumpeted constantly, calling for others who never came. She was the last mammoth in what would become Nebraska, and she spent her final years walking circuits of territory that had once supported hundreds of her kind. The year was 10,900 years ago. Climate change and human hunting had eliminated every other mammoth for 1,000 miles. But Lonely survived through a combination of intelligence, luck, and human sympathy. The band that controlled her territory had decided to protect her. This wasn't altruism. Elder Joseph, our name for him, remembered when mammoth herds blackened horizons. He'd watched the emptying happen. First the bulls vanished, then family groups dwindled, then only stragglers remained. He understood extinction was happening and decided his band wouldn't deliver the final blow. Lonely was about 40 years old, past breeding age, even if males existed. Her tusks were worn, her teeth grinding toward failure. She followed the same paths her mother had taught her, visiting water sources where her family had drunk for generations. She maintained the wallows, cleared the trails, performed all the ecosystem engineering mammoths had done for millennia alone. The protection wasn't easy. Other bands wanted to kill her, tons of meat and ivory walking unguarded. Joseph's band had to post watchers, sometimes fighting off hunting parties. They were spending resources, protecting a resource they couldn't use. It made no survival sense, but Lonely had become something more than meat. She was a living memory, a reminder of the world that was vanishing. Children who'd never seen mammoth herds could at least see one mammoth and could understand what was being lost. She knew the humans were there. Her eyesight was poor, but she could smell them, hear them. For 3 years, she tolerated their presence. They never approached closer than 100 yards. She never charged. A détente between species, both understanding the other could end it instantly. The fourth winter was brutal, ice storms followed by deep snow. Lonely couldn't break through to ground forage. Her fat reserves depleted. She stood in one place for days, swaying, conserving energy. The humans could have fed her, thrown hay or branches. They didn't. Protection didn't mean interference. She died standing, frozen upright, facing south toward territories where spring came sooner. The humans found her in that position when the snow melted. They could have harvested everything, meat frozen fresh, ivory intact. They took nothing. Instead, they did something unprecedented. They buried her, not casually, but ceremonially. 30 people spent 5 days digging through frozen ground. They positioned her carefully, tusks pointing skyward. They included no grave goods. She wasn't human and didn't need human things. But they covered her with red ochre, the same treatment given to their dead. Elder Joseph spoke at the burial. No one recorded his words, but the intention was clear from the effort invested. This wasn't just a mammoth burial. It was a burial of the world mammoths represented, an acknowledgement that something irreplaceable had ended. The band maintained Lonely's trails for another generation, keeping them clear, though no mammoth would walk them again. They told stories of her, the last giant, the lonely trumpet, the mammoth they protected instead of killed. The stories evolved, becoming mythology, then forgotten entirely. Lonely was the last mammoth in Nebraska, but across America, other lonely mammoths wandered empty territories, calling for herds that would never answer. Each died alone, witnessed by humans who'd helped engineer their solitude. The bone was from a swan's wing, hollow and light in the hands of the woman preparing it. This would become technology that would save more human lives than any weapon ever created. She was making the first needle with an eye, and though she couldn't know it, she was about to revolutionize human survival. This was 25,000 years ago in what would become Idaho. Winter temperatures reached 50 degrees Celsius. Exposed skin froze in seconds. The band had fire, shelter, and food. What they didn't have was clothing that truly sealed out cold. Rough hides draped and tied leaked heat at every joint. Children were dying from exposure inside shelters. Maria, our name for her, had been experimenting for months. She tried threading sinew through holes punched with awls. Too large, leaked air. She'd attempted weaving, but it took too long and wasn't warm enough. She needed something that could create tight, sealed seams using the materials at hand. The innovation came from desperation. Using a sharpened stone bearing, thinner than any made before, she carefully drilled through the swan bone near one end. Not a large hole, just big enough for sinew thread. The bone's natural hollow provided strength without bulk. The point, scraped sharp, could penetrate and hide without tearing. The first garment made with this needle was for her daughter, born that autumn. Using caribou hide, turned fur inward, she created something unprecedented. Fitted clothing, not draped, not wrapped, shaped to the body with sealed seams that trapped air for insulation. Sleeves that attached to the torso, a hood that sealed around the face, mittens connected with sinew cords. The child survived winter, others didn't. Word spread through the band. Maria taught the technique to other women, though most broke dozens of bones before creating functional needles. The skill requirement was enormous, understanding bone grain, maintaining consistent pressure while drilling, achieving point sharpness without brittleness. Within one generation, every member of the band had fitted clothing. Winter mortality dropped by 60%. They could hunt in weather that previously meant death, could travel between camps without losing fingers to frostbite. Children could play outside instead of huddling by fires. But the needle did more than create clothes. It enabled art. Decorative stitching appeared immediately. Geometric patterns, animal representations, clan symbols. Clothing became identity, status, story. A person's entire history could be read in their stitching patterns. The needle enabled mobility. Tents could be sewn windproof, bags could carry water without leaking, boats could be made from sealed skins. Suddenly, territories previously uninhabitable opened up. Rivers became highways instead of barriers. Archaeological evidence from this period shows explosive population growth, not from increased births, but decreased deaths. The needle was saving more lives than all hunting improvements combined. A band with needle technology could survive where others perished. Other innovations followed. Thread made from plant fibers allowed finer work. Needles specialized. Thick ones for heavy hides, thin for delicate work, curved for specific tasks. By 15,000 years ago, needle kits contained dozens of specialized tools. Maria lived to see her grandchildren warm in fitted parkas, playing in temperatures that would have killed her as a child. She died at the remarkable age of 52, buried with a kit of 50 needles, a fortune in technology, marking her as the innovation's master. The needle she created from swan bone sparked a revolution that echoes today. Every sewn seam, every fitted garment, every survival suit descends from that moment when a desperate mother decided cold wouldn't take another child. She couldn't know she was saving the species. She just knew she was saving her daughter. The ember had traveled 800 miles, carried in a hollowed mammoth tusk filled with dried fungus, fed every few hours with careful breaths, protected from rain under precious hide. The two boys carrying it hadn't slept properly in weeks. If this ember died, their entire band would follow it into darkness. This was 18,000 years ago, northern Alaska. Their band's fire had died during a river crossing when the raft overturned. Every fire-starting tool went into the glacial water. In temperatures of 40 degrees without fire, they had perhaps 3 days. The nearest known fire belonged to their sister band, last seen 2 seasons ago, heading southeast. The boys, 14 and 16, volunteered to run, not walk, run, 800 miles through Ice Age Alaska, carrying humanity's most precious technology in an ivory tube. Fire wasn't just warmth. It was everything. Water purification through boiling, cooking that made calories bioavailable, protection from predators, light during 4-month nights. Without it, humans became prey, freezing in darkness, dying from waterborne diseases. Starting fire from scratch in Arctic conditions was nearly impossible. The bow drill method required perfect conditions, dry wood, proper tinder, no wind, warm enough that hands could maintain friction for 20 minutes. In winter Alaska, those conditions never aligned. So bands maintained eternal flames, fire that never died, tended continuously, protected like a living thing. Some fires had burned for generations, their original source lost to memory. They were inherited, maintained, and protected. Letting fire die was the ultimate failure. The boys ran in shifts, one sleeping while walking, held up by the other. They ate while moving, dried meat, rendered fat, anything that didn't require stopping. Their feet, wrapped in double-layered fur boots, developed frostbite that would cost them toes. They didn't stop. Predators stalked them. A short-faced bear tracked them for 50 miles, waiting for exhaustion. Dire wolves circled at night, eyes reflecting their carefully shielded ember. The boys took turns sleeping, one always awake, spear ready, ember protected. On day 12, they found the sister band's old camp, cold, abandoned tracks heading further south. The boys followed, their own tracks now bloody from feet worn through boots. The ember still lived, but barely. The fungus fuel was almost gone. Day 15 brought salvation and heartbreak. They found the sister band, or what remained. Disease had taken half. The survivors were burning their last wood, preparing for death, 2 fires dying instead of 1. But the boys had run through forests. They'd marked dead-standing trees, dry wood, locations where lightning had left charred but usable fuel. They had a map of fire sources across 800 miles. Knowledge that meant survival. The combined bands followed the boys back, collecting wood at marked spots. The ember, now split between 2 tubes, made the return journey. Some died on that march, the old, the sick, the weak. But most survived. The fire survived. The boys became men on that journey. Their feet never fully healed. They walked with limps that marked them as the fire runners. They were given first food, first choice in mates, first voice in councils. They'd earned it by running 800 miles with death in a tube. The ember they carried burned for another 1,000 years, passing through dozens of bands, carefully maintained and split when groups divided, DNA of fire spreading across continents. When it finally died in a cabin in what would become Montana, the world had changed enough that starting a new fire was easy. But every fire lit by match or lighter carries the ghost of two boys running through Ice Age Alaska, protecting an ember that meant everything. She was 11 years old and sewing her death shroud, not because she was dying, but because in Ice Age Alaska, your burial clothes were your only clothes, worn daily until they wrapped your corpse. The parka taking shape under her small fingers would either keep her alive for decades or fail in its first storm, making the burial function immediate. This was 16,000 years ago. The girl who we'll call Anna was creating a garment that would be studied 0 years later as an engineering masterpiece. 24 separate pieces, each cut to specific measurements, 4 layers with different functions, sealed seams that would remain waterproof through years of use. The outer layer, caribou hide with fur facing out, specially selected from animals killed in late autumn when the fur was densest, water-resistant, windproof, durable. The second layer, muskox wool, softer than cashmere, warmer than sheep's wool, naturally antimicrobial. Third, bird skins with feathers facing inward, creating dead airspace for insulation. The inner layer, rabbit fur, soft against skin, wicking moisture away from the body. Each layer required different treatment. The caribou hide was scraped, stretched, smoked to prevent rot, and worked until supple. The muskox wool was cleaned, combed, and felted into sheets. Bird skins were cured with brain matter to maintain flexibility. Rabbit fur was processed with urine to prevent shedding. Anna had been learning since age 4, first simple stitches on scraps, then repairing tears, now creating from scratch. Her grandmother supervised, hands too arthritic for fine work, but eyes still sharp for mistakes. One bad seam could mean frozen death. The hood alone took 3 weeks, not a simple covering, but an engineered microclimate. Wolverine fur around the face, the only fur that wouldn't frost from breath. A tunnel design that created vortexes warming air before it reached the face. A closure system using bone toggles that could be operated with mittened hands. The torso required pregnancy planning. Anna was 11. By 13, she might be pregnant. The parka needed expansion capability without compromising insulation. Hidden panels with extra material, seams that could be let out, designed for a body that would change size repeatedly over decades. Decorations weren't vanity, but identity. Specific patterns identified her band, her family, her achievements. If she died far from home, the symbols would tell finders who to notify. If she met strangers, the patterns would announce her affiliations. Clothing was a passport, genealogy and autobiography combined. The waterproofing was crucial. Not just rain, but sweat. Moisture inside clothing meant death. Seams were sealed with rendered seal fat mixed with ochre. Thread holes were backed with thin gut. Overlapping designs ensured water ran off rather than penetrating. Anna worked through summer, racing against winter. Her fingers bled from needle pricks. Her back ached from hunching. Her eyes strained in dim light. But stopping meant facing winter in old clothes, and growth spurts had made her childhood parka dangerously small. The first test came during the autumn seal hunt, freezing rain, the worst possible condition, water that wanted to be ice, seeking any gap in clothing to freeze against skin. Anna stood in the storm for hours, waiting with her mother for seals to surface. The parka held, not a drop penetrated. By winter, the parka had proven itself through blizzards, ice fog, and temperatures that killed exposed skin in minutes. Anna had created mobile survival architecture, a personal environment that made the uninhabitable habitable. She would wear it for 8 years until pregnancy required a new one. That parka would outlive Anna. When she died at 43, ancient by Ice Age standards, she was buried in it as planned. The frozen ground preserved it perfectly. When archaeologists found her, they found the parka intact, every stitch visible, the engineering readable. They also found something else. Inside the hood, sewn where only Anna would know, was a single blue bead traded from Asia, worth a fortune, hidden like a secret. A reminder that even in clothes meant for death Ice Age, humans maintained beauty, privacy, and hope. The house was made from garbage and genius in equal measure. Mammoth skulls for foundation blocks, shoulder blades for walls, tusks as curved roof beams, ribs for secondary supports. What looked like a bone graveyard was actually architecture that would inspire dome construction 15,000 years later. This was Majestic, Ukraine, 15,000 years ago, though similar structures appeared across Ice Age America. When trees were scarce and temperatures deadly, humans built homes from the giants they'd killed. The construction required engineering that wouldn't be formalized until Rome. The foundation was a perfect circle, 16 feet in diameter. Skulls were placed chin down, creating stable platforms. The weight distribution was calculated, heavier bones at stress points, lighter ones for fill. Someone understood load-bearing principles without mathematical equations. Peter, our name for the builder, had learned from his grandfather, who'd learned from his 3 generations of architectural knowledge, accumulated through trial and fatal error. The band had lost entire families to collapsed shelters. Each death taught lessons written in bone placement. The first step was gathering materials, not fresh bones. Those were food, tools, fuel. These were weathered remains collected from natural death sites. A single house required bones from at least 15 mammoths, transported without wheels, arranged without cranes. Every piece moved by human muscle and determination. The skulls alone weighed 100 pounds each. Moving them required wooden sledges, multiple people, and acceptance that injuries were inevitable. Crushed fingers, wrenched backs, hernias, the medical cost of architecture, but the alternative was freezing. The design was brilliant. Overlapping shoulder blades created a shingle effect, shedding rain and snow. Gaps were chinked with clay, moss, and fur. The entrance faced away from prevailing winds, with an antechamber creating an airlock. Cold air sank into a pit, while warm air rose into the living space. Inside, the organization rivaled modern efficiency. Sleeping areas along walls insulated with furs, central hearth with smoke hole aligned to create draft without heat loss, storage pits dug into permafrost, refrigeration that never failed, work areas positioned for maximum light from the entrance. These weren't temporary shelters. Families lived in them for generations. Children were born in them, learned to walk on their floors, grew up considering mammoth bone architecture normal. The bones absorbed memories, cooking smells, smoke stains, the oils from countless hands touching the same supports. But the houses were also statements. The size and quality of bones indicated status. A house with matched tusks suggested superior hunting. Decorated bones showed artistic leisure. Some houses had painted skulls, carved tusks, bones arranged in patterns that served no structural purpose, pure aesthetics in a world where calories mattered. The acoustic properties were discovered accidentally. The curved bones created resonance chambers. Songs sung inside amplified and enriched. Drums beaten against skull walls produced deep frequencies that carried for miles. The houses became instruments, turning shelter into communication devices. Maintenance was constant. Weather degraded bindings. Bones shifted with freeze-thaw cycles. Every spring meant rebuilding portions, but the bones themselves lasted decades. Some houses show evidence of continuous occupation for 300 years, 12 generations under the same mammoth skull roof. When mammoths went extinct, the architecture died with them. No other bones provided the size and durability. Humans had to develop new construction methods. Wood and hide structures that were easier to build, but less permanent. The age of bone architecture ended not through innovation, but through lack of materials. Today, reconstruction attempts using elephant bones and modern tools still struggle to match Ice Age engineering. We have equations and machinery. They had intuition and desperation. They built better. One detail haunts archaeologists. In several houses, human infant bones were found mortared into the walls, not burials, but structural elements, using their dead as building materials. The pragmatism is horrifying until you consider the alternative. No shelter meant everyone died. The mammoth tusk had been dead for 5 years, weathered enough that the outer layer flaked away, but the inner ivory remained steel-hard. In the hands of master craftsman Marcus, this 16-foot curve would become 30 spear points, 200 needles, and a dozen art pieces. Nothing wasted, every chip calculated. This was 14,000 years ago, Wyoming. Marcus was what we call an industrial engineer, except his industry was death transformed into life. Every mammoth that died, every giant sloth that fell, became raw material for technologies that kept humans alive. The process started before the animal died. Hunters studied skeletal structure, not just for killing, but for harvesting. They knew which bones made the best tools: femurs for clubs, ribs for sled runners, shoulder blades for shovels. They killed with future manufacturing in mind. Ivory was the platinum of the Ice Age, harder than bone, softer than stone, workable with stone tools. But working it required understanding grain structure. Cut wrong, and it shattered. Cut right, and it peeled in predictable sheets. Marcus had learned from 20 years of mistakes, each error costing irreplaceable material. The spear points were engineering marvels, not just sharp, but balanced. The ivory's natural curve was incorporated into the design, creating points that flew true despite asymmetry. Each was hafted with pine pitch and sinew in patterns that distributed stress. These weren't disposable. They were maintained, resharpened, passed down through generations. The needles required different techniques. Using sandstone grinding, Marcus could create ivory needles thinner than modern steel ones. The eye was drilled using a bow drill with sand abrasive, a process taking hours for each needle, but ivory needles lasted lifetimes. They bent without breaking, stayed sharp, and developed patinas that made them family heirlooms. Bone had different applications. Giant ground sloth femurs, thick as tree trunks, became percussion instruments. Mammoth ribs, naturally curved, formed perfect sled runners that glided over snow. Skulls became drums, storage vessels, and architectural elements. Every bone had a purpose, sometimes multiple purposes over time. The marrow extraction tools were specialized, not just cracking bones, but accessing marrow without contamination. Specific hammerstones for different bone types, anvils positioned to create predictable fracture patterns. The marrow itself was food, but also waterproofing, medicine, and lamp fuel. One mammoth femur provided enough marrow to waterproof an entire parka. But the most innovative tools were composite. Ivory points set in bone handles wrapped with hide, ground sloth claws hafted as harvesting tools, mammoth hair spun into cords stronger than modern nylon. These hybrids combined properties no single material possessed, art tools developed from surplus. When survival was assured, bones became canvases, carved, etched, painted. The same tools that processed food created beauty. A mammoth shoulder blade became a palette. Ivory fragments became beads. Even bone dust had purpose, mixed with fat to create paint that adhered to cave walls. Some tools transcended function. A spear thrower carved from mammoth ivory, decorated with a mammoth giving birth. Functional but also spiritual, a story in ivory about ivory's source. These pieces suggest tool-making was a ceremony as much as craft. The toolkit from one mammoth could equip a band for years, but as mammoths became rarer, each kill became more precious. The last mammoths were processed with desperate efficiency. Even bone splinters were saved, ground into paste for waterproofing. Nothing wasted because nothing could be replaced. When the giants died out, the tool industry collapsed. Deer bones were too small, buffalo bones too brittle. The specialized knowledge of giant bone working became useless. Within 2 generations, techniques refined over millennia were forgotten. Marcus died before the last mammoth, still believing the supply was infinite. His tools outlived him, outlived the mammoths, outlived the memory of both maker and material. Archaeologists finding his work can read his signature in the grain, the practiced hand of someone who transformed death into daily life. The vote was unanimous: leave him behind. Thomas couldn't walk, his legs shattered from a mammoth charge. Winter was 3 days away. Staying meant everyone died. Moving meant Thomas died. The math was simple. The choice was impossible. This was 12,000 years ago, Montana. The band of 32 people faced the decision every Ice Age group dreaded: abandon the injured or die together. Sarah, Thomas's sister, stood up. I will stay with him. Her husband joined her. Then I stay. Their children had no choice. Now 5 would die instead of 1. The math was getting worse, but something shifted. Thomas wasn't just an injured hunter. He was the band's memory. He knew where obsidian could be found after earthquakes, which plants cured infection, how to read weather 3 days out. His body was broken, but his mind held 40 years of survival knowledge. Lose him, and they'd lose more than 1 person. Elder Margaret made the decision that would define humanity. We all stay. We survive here or nowhere. The archaeological record from Shawnee-Minisink preserves what happened next. Instead of moving to winter grounds, they fortified in place, built windbreaks using every available hide, dug storage pits that went down to permafrost, created an invalid shelter. Double-walled, heated by stones warmed in fire, then brought inside. Thomas directed from his bed of furs. His teenage nephew became his legs, running wherever Thomas pointed. His 7-year-old daughter became his hands for fine work. The band reorganized around immobility, creating systems that hadn't existed before. Food was the crisis. Without Thomas hunting, protein was short. But Thomas knew something others didn't. Where bears denied, dangerous knowledge but desperate times. 3 hunters, following Thomas's precise directions, found a hibernating bear, killed it sleeping, enough meat and fat for 2 months. The healing took longer. Thomas's femur had snapped clean. Sarah, following his instructions, set it using cedar splints and rawhide wrappings. The pain was so intense Thomas passed out repeatedly, but the bone began knitting, crooked, shortened, but healing. Winter came like death itself. Temperatures hit -50 degrees. The band consumed calories at terrifying rates, just maintaining body heat. The bear meat ran out. They ate anything. Lichens scraped from rocks, inner bark of trees, leather clothing boiled for whatever nutrition remained. But they held together. When fuel ran low, they slept in piles sharing heat. When someone weakened, others gave their food portions. When despair hit, and it hit everyone, they sang songs about spring, about successful hunts, about grandchildren not yet born. Thomas started walking in February. Not well, he'd limp forever, but walking. The band had lost weight, lost toes to frostbite, lost 2 elders to pneumonia, but 28 of 32 survived. In Ice Age terms, that was a miracle. The band that stayed together created something new, precedent for caring over abandonment. Other bands heard the story. Some called them foolish. Others started making different choices. The cultural shift was subtle but profound. Humans were becoming people who saved each other. Thomas lived another 12 years, never hunting again, but teaching constantly. Every young person learned his knowledge. When he died peacefully in sleep, his funeral was the largest gathering in the region's memory. 7 bands came to honor the man who proved the injured had value. The vote to leave him had been unanimous. The choice to stay had been revolutionary, and revolution, once started, spreads like fire through dry grass. The wound was going septic. 3 days since the dire wolf's bite, and red streaks were climbing up the boy's arm like poison rivers. In a world without antibiotics, without surgery, without hope, the boy's mother brought him to Marcus, the band's medicine man, though he'd never call himself that. Marcus was 28, ancient for a healer who'd started learning at 5. His knowledge came from his grandmother, who got it from hers, stretching back through generations of trial and fatal error. Every cure was paid for in previous deaths. This was 15,000 years ago, Wyoming. Marcus examined the bite using skills that would surprise modern doctors. He checked pupil response, skin elasticity, fever patterns. He smelled the wound. Different infections had distinct odors. His diagnosis was swift: blood poisoning, maybe 2 days before it reached the heart. The treatment began immediately. First, debridement, removing dead tissue using obsidian blades sharper than surgical steel. The boy screamed. His mother held him. Marcus worked fast, knowing shock could kill as quickly as infection. Next came the maggots. Marcus had cultivated them specifically, blowfly larvae that ate only dead tissue, leaving living cells alone. He packed the wound with them, covered it with moistened moss. The maggots would clean what his blade couldn't reach. For fever, willow bark tea, containing salicin, aspirin's precursor. For pain, cannabis leaves, chewed and packed as a poultice. For infection, honey mixed with rendered bear fat and ochre, creating an antimicrobial seal. Each component was chosen from decades of observation. But medicine was more than substances. Marcus sang while working, not random songs, but specific healing chants. Modern research shows singing regulates breathing, reduces stress hormones, boosts immune response. Marcus didn't know science. He knew it worked. The spiritual component wasn't superstition, but psychology. Marcus wore his healing outfit: wolf skull headdress, necklace of bear claws, painted symbols. The costume triggered a placebo response, making the boy's mind assist healing. Belief, Marcus knew, was medicine too. For 3 days, Marcus never left the boy's side. He changed maggot dressings, monitored fever, adjusted treatments. When delirium hit, Marcus held the boy through seizures. When breathing stopped, Marcus performed what we'd recognize as rescue breathing, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation he'd learned from his grandmother. The crisis came on the 4th night. Fever spiked. The boy convulsed. His heart raced, then slowed dangerously. Marcus made a desperate choice: ice therapy. He packed snow around the boy's head and chest, forcing rapid cooling. The shock could kill, but fever definitely would. The boy survived. The fever broke. The infection retreated. Within 2 weeks, he was walking. Within a month, using the arm, the scarring was severe, but functionality remained. In Ice Age terms, this was resurrection. Marcus treated everything: broken bones set with cedar splints and pine pitch childbirth complications, managed with ergot fungus that contained compounds similar to modern obstetric drugs, depression treated with St. John's wort wounds, sutured with sinew thread and bone needles. His pharmacy was the landscape: poppy for severe pain, yarrow for immune boost, foxglove for heart problems, though dosing was dangerously imprecise. Every plant had purpose, season, preparation method, knowledge so complex that Marcus spent half his time teaching, ensuring information survived his death. The payment system was unique. Marcus never charged. Healing was an obligation, not commerce, but healed patients owed him one favor: callable anytime. This created a network of people indebted to his survival, smart economics disguised as altruism. Marcus died at 34 from pneumonia, couldn't heal himself, but his 7 apprentices carried on, each adding innovations. The boy he'd saved from the wolf bite became a healer himself, pioneering surgical techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered for millennia. Ice Age medicine men weren't primitive shamans, but empirical scientists using observation, experimentation, and accumulated knowledge to fight death with stone tools and plants. Their success rate was low by modern standards, but miraculous for the technology available. She was born with a club foot, her left foot twisted inward at an angle that made walking impossible. In a world that required mobility for survival, she should have died in infancy. Instead, she lived 43 years, had 3 children, and became her band's greatest storyteller. Her name is lost, but her skeleton, found in Nevada and dated to 11,000 years ago, tells a story that shatters assumptions about Ice Age brutality. Every bone shows evidence of care, healed fractures from falls, dental work where infected teeth were deliberately removed, arthritis managed through positioning that required constant assistance. We'll call her Anna. Born into a world where everyone walked 20 miles daily, she couldn't walk at all. Her parents faced the decision immediately: abandon her or adapt. They chose adaptation. Her father, a toolmaker, created America's first prosthetic. Using mammoth ivory and wrapped leather, he built a boot that held her foot in functional position. It required daily adjustment as she grew, hourly maintenance to prevent sores. The effort was enormous for marginal improvement. She could stand, barely walk, and never run. But walking wasn't her value. By age 5, while other children ran and played, Anna sat with elders, absorbing stories. Her memory was perfect, compensation for immobility. She could recite 12-hour sagas word perfectly. In a pre-literate society, she was a living library. The band restructured around her limitations. When they moved camps, 2 hunters carried her on a travois, extra effort that meant less hunting, less gathering. But Anna carried something heavier: the entire oral history of 5 allied bands. Lose her, lose centuries of accumulated knowledge. Her childhood was painful. The club foot hurt constantly. Other children were cruel, as children are. But Anna's mother, herself suffering from chronic illness that limited mobility, taught her daughter that value wasn't measured in miles walked, but in stories remembered. By adolescence, Anna was indispensable. She knew every hunting story, every cautionary tale, every piece of inherited wisdom. Young hunters consulted her before expeditions. She'd never hunted, but knew more about animal behavior than those who'd killed hundreds. Marriage seemed impossible, but Thomas, a hunter whose arm was permanently damaged from a bear attack, saw opportunity. He couldn't throw spears effectively. She couldn't walk. Together they were one functional person. It was economics that became love. Their children were Anna's greatest fear. Would they inherit her deformity? All 3 were born physically perfect, but raised understanding that difference didn't mean worthless. They became her legs, running wherever she pointed, returning with observations she'd interpret. Anna's greatest contribution came during the volcanic winter of her 30th year. Ash blocked the sun. Temperatures plummeted. Usual food sources vanished. Anna remembered a story, her great-grandmother's tale of similar conditions: hidden caves with preserved nuts, emergency foods no one considered edible. Her memory saved the band from starvation. The archaeological evidence shows Anna received better nutrition than most band members during her final years. Isotope analysis reveals a diet rich in proteins and fats, foods brought specifically to her. She was being honored, treasured, kept alive at communal expense. Her death was mourned regionally. 7 bands attended her burial. She was interred with ivory needles, obsidian blades, rare shells, wealth representing thousands of hours of labor. But most remarkably, she was buried sitting up, positioned as she'd lived, ready to tell stories in the afterlife. Anna proved something revolutionary. In a world that seemed to demand physical perfection, humans chose compassion over efficiency. Every immobile person who survived represented a band's decision that humanity meant more than utility. Her story survived 3 generations before being forgotten, but her impact echoes in every society that chooses care over abandonment, that sees value beyond physical capability. The hand was small, maybe 8 years old, pressed against the cave wall. Someone blew red ochre around it, creating a negative image that would last 13,000 years. This wasn't decoration. This was a declaration. I existed. I was here. I mattered. The cave was in Tennessee, and it contained America's first art gallery. Hundreds of images painted, carved, and sculpted by Ice Age Americans who had every reason to focus solely on survival, but chose to create beauty anyway. The artist, we'll call her Maya, was the band's designated painter, though that wasn't a formal role. She was 12, with eyes that saw differently. Where others saw rock, she saw canvas. Where others saw ochre as wound treatment, she saw color that could capture sunlight. Her training started at 4, grinding pigments with her grandmother, red ochre from iron oxide, yellow from clay, black from manganese or charcoal, white from kaolin, mixed with bear fat or blood as binders. Each color had recipes, meanings, purposes beyond prettiness. The first rule, never paint casually. Every image required preparation, fasting, meditation, consultation with elders. Art wasn't entertainment, but communication with forces that determined survival. Paint the wrong thing, anger the spirits, everyone dies. The responsibility was crushing. Maya's first major work was commissioned in a sense. The band had survived a catastrophic winter, and the elders wanted it remembered, not just as stories, but as images. Maya spent weeks planning, sketching with charcoal on flat stones, getting approval for every detail. The painting showed the hunt that saved them. A mammoth surrounded by stick figures, but each figure was individual. One taller, one with a spear, one fallen. Not generic humans, but specific people. Uncle Marcus, who made the killing thrust. Cousin Sarah, who was trampled. Baby Thomas, watching from mother's back. The technique was sophisticated. She used brushes made from horsehair, some just 3 hairs thick, for detail work. She created depth using color gradients, movement through positioning. The mammoth's eye, painted last, seemed to follow viewers, a technique that wouldn't be discovered for millennia. But Maya painted secrets too. Behind obvious images were hidden ones, visible only at certain angles or in specific light. A bear that appeared at sunset, human figures that emerged from rock formations. The cave itself became interactive art, changing with conditions. The handprints were community art. Everyone, youngest to oldest, left their mark, but the arrangement wasn't random. Family groups together, hunters in one area, gatherers in another, a social map painted on stone. Future archaeologists would puzzle over patterns that made perfect sense to those who created them. Some art was protective, circles around handprints, shields against evil, zigzag patterns that represented successful journeys, animals painted backwards, confusing evil spirits about direction. The cave wasn't just a gallery, but a spiritual fortress. Maya lived to 30, teaching 3 apprentices before dying in childbirth. Her students continued the tradition, each adding innovations. One discovered that firelight made paintings move, flicker effects creating animation. Another learned to use cave acoustics, painting where echoes were strongest. The art evolved from representation to abstraction. Later paintings showed not what was seen, but what was felt. Fear represented by sharp angles, hope by upward curves, love by intertwined lines, emotional landscapes painted on physical stone. But around 10,000 years ago, the painting stopped, not gradually, abruptly. Climate change, cultural shift, population movement. The caves were abandoned, art forgotten. When rediscovered millennia later, no one could read the messages. Maya's handprint remains, small, delicate, surrounded by her family's prints. A child's hand that held brushes, created beauty, left messages we can see but not understand. She existed. She was there. She mattered. He was 17. She was 15. And their bands were enemies. 3 generations of territorial disputes, blood feuds, and stolen resources meant their love was impossible. Romeo and Juliet had nothing on Marcus and Sarah, whose romance played out against the backdrop of Ice Age Wyoming 12,000 years ago. They met at a neutral gathering, the annual Salmon Run, where multiple bands converged under temporary truce. Sarah was gathering with her sisters when she saw Marcus crafting spear points. Not unusual, except he was doing it wrong. Deliberately wrong, creating beautiful but non-functional art pieces from rainbow obsidian. She laughed. He looked up. In a world where everyone knew everyone within 50 miles, a new face was shocking. They were from opposite sides of the territory, speaking dialects different enough to require gestures, but something connected. The courtship lasted 3 days, all the salmon runs allowed. They couldn't be seen together. That would trigger violence. Instead, they left messages, stones arranged in patterns only they understood, flowers placed where the other would find them, a carved ivory bead hidden under a marked rock. When the bands separated, they thought it was over. But Marcus started hunting farther from his territory, closer to hers. Sarah gathered plants in dangerous borderlands. They'd meet for minutes, sometimes just to see each other across a valley. The risk was execution from either band. Winter forced decision. Marcus's band was starving. Poor hunting depleted stores. Sarah's band had surplus from a successful mammoth kill. Traditional enemies, but Sarah convinced her father to trade. The negotiation site was neutral ground, and Marcus volunteered as his band's representative. The trade was tense, warriors from both bands, weapons visible. One wrong word meant bloodshed, but the exchange worked, meat for high-quality furs. As packages changed hands, Sarah and Marcus touched fingers for 1 second. Her father saw. Instead of rage, he saw opportunity. His daughter was valuable, young, healthy, skilled. Marcus's band had things they needed: obsidian sources, coastal shells, technical knowledge. A marriage alliance could end generations of conflict. The negotiation took months. Messages sent through neutral parties, terms discussed. Where would they live? Which band would gain? What children would inherit? Romance became economics, but economics that might prevent war. The wedding happened at spring equinox, the same neutral ground as the Salmon Run. Both bands attended, suspicious, armed, but committed. The ceremony was simple: hands bound with mammoth hair rope, vows spoken in both dialects, ochre paint marking them as joined. They couldn't live with either band initially, too much residual hatred. Instead, they established a new camp between territories, alone, except for Sarah's younger brother and Marcus's cousin as witnesses, that neither band was violating terms. That first year was brutal. Building shelter from nothing, hunting unfamiliar territory. Sarah miscarried their first child during a blizzard when Marcus was hunting. They almost froze, almost starved, almost gave up. But spring came, as it always does. Their son was born the second winter, named Thomas, meaning peace in both dialects, the first child of combined bands. His birth created something unprecedented. Grandparents who'd been enemies now shared a grandchild. The bands began cooperating, shared hunts, exchanged knowledge, intermarriage spread. Within a generation, they were functionally one band. The territorial disputes ended not through conquest, but through love. Marcus and Sarah lived together 41 years, extraordinary for Ice Age marriages, had 7 children, 32 grandchildren, died within days of each other, buried together, hands still bound with mammoth rope. Their love story survived in oral tradition for centuries before being forgotten. But the peace it created lasted. Two bands became one, stronger together than apart. The dripping started in March and never stopped. For the first time in 4,000 years, ice was losing. This was 11 through 700 years ago, and the younger Dryas, Earth's last desperate attempt at ice age, was finally dying. In Montana, a grandmother stood outside her shelter, feeling warm rain on her face for the first time in her 70 years. She wept, not from joy, but from terror. Her entire life had been calibrated to cold. Every skill, every piece of knowledge, every survival strategy assumed eternal winter. Now the world was melting, and with it, everything she knew. The speed was catastrophic, not geological time, but human time. Temperatures rose 15 degrees in perhaps 50 years. Imagine Seattle becoming Phoenix in one lifetime. The psychological shock alone killed people. Elder suicides spiked as their expertise became obsolete overnight. The landscape transformed daily. Rivers appeared where none existed, flowing from glaciers that were dying like gut-shot giants. Valleys that had been frozen highways became impossible swamps. Lakes formed and vanished in single seasons. The geography people had memorized for generations became fiction. For young Thomas, age 16, the melting meant opportunity. New lands were opening, places his grandfather's grandfather couldn't have imagined. Green valleys where ice had ruled, forests sprouting in former tundra. He wanted to explore, to claim, to discover. But for his grandmother, the melting meant endings. The ice caves where they'd stored meat for generations flooded. The permafrost that preserved food turned to rot, creating mush. The predictable seasons, brutal but consistent, became chaos. Spring in January, winter in June, no pattern to follow. The animals were confused too. Caribou arrived at traditional crossing points to find rivers too wild to cross. Mammoths searched for grasslands now becoming forests. Predators and prey mixed in combinations that had never existed, creating ecological chaos that meant hunting success plummeted. The archaeological record from this period shows desperation, sudden dietary changes from megafauna to small game, from meat to plants, toolkits changing rapidly, abandoning traditional designs for experimental ones, settlement patterns shifting from permanent to nomadic as people chased stability that didn't exist. One family story, preserved at the Bowling Brook site in Massachusetts, captures the era. They lived in the same shelter for 6 generations, improving it, expanding it, making it home. Rising meltwater forced evacuation in hours. They saved what they could carry, watched water claim the rest. The children didn't understand why parents wept over lost stones and bones. The social fabric tore. Bands that had cooperated for centuries fought over remaining stable territories. Traditional agreements about hunting grounds became meaningless when the grounds themselves vanished. 3 bands went to war over a single valley that remained frozen, the last piece of the old world. But humans adapted, as we always do. New technologies emerged from necessity. Boats became essential as landscapes flooded. Fishing equipment replaced mammoth hunting tools. Seasonal rounds were abandoned for opportunistic wandering. Nothing was permanent, so everything became portable. The grandmother lived to see her great-grandchildren swimming in a lake where she'd once hunted on solid ice. They couldn't understand her stories of eternal winter, of ice mountains, of cold that killed in minutes. To them, she was speaking mythology. To her, she was describing yesterday. She died at 78, ancient beyond measure. Her last words, reported through oral tradition: the ice was honest, it killed you or it didn't. This warmth lies, it promises plenty but delivers confusion. The melting continued for centuries, each generation inheriting a world warmer than their parents knew, until the Ice Age became legend, then myth, then forgotten entirely. Only stones, remember, glacial erratics dropped by dying ice, standing in valleys like tombstones for a frozen world. March 15th, 10,900 years ago. Sunrise over what would become Texas revealed something unprecedented. Hundreds of mammoth carcasses stretching to the horizon, their bodies unmarked by spears or butchering. They hadn't been hunted. They'd simply died all at once, as if someone had turned off their existence. This was the North American megafauna extinction event, and it happened faster than anyone imagined. Within perhaps 500 years, an eye blink in geological time, 70% of large animal species vanished. Not declined, not migrated, vanished. Marcus stood among the corpses, his hunting band shocked into silence. These weren't old or sick animals. Juveniles, pregnant females, healthy bulls, all dead. The smell was overwhelming, but nobody moved to the butcher. Something about this death felt wrong, cursed, untouchable. The cause was invisible. Climate chaos combined with human pressure had created an extinction vortex. As temperatures swung wildly, plants couldn't adapt. Mammoths needed specific grasses that were being replaced by forests. Their food was vanishing faster than they could migrate to find more. But starvation wasn't killing them this quickly. Dr. Faith Blevins's modern analysis of similar die-offs suggests disease, perhaps anthrax released from thawing permafrost, spreading through stressed populations with no immunity. The giants were dying from the ground up, poisoned by the earth they'd walked for millions of years. For human hunters like Marcus, this should have been abundance. Endless meat, ivory, resources. Instead, it was a catastrophe. Their entire culture was built around hunting megafauna, tools designed for killing giants, rituals centered on mammoth spirits, identity defined by what they hunted. Within one generation, everything changed. Marcus's son would never throw a spear at a mammoth. They were gone. Giant ground sloths, gone. Saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, giant beavers, gone, gone, gone. The landscape emptied like someone had drained an ocean. The psychological impact was devastating. Imagine if all large animals vanished tomorrow. No deer, no cattle, no horses. That's what these people experienced. The silence where trumpeting once echoed. The emptiness where herds once thundered. Survival required complete cultural revolution. Hunting strategies developed over millennia became useless. Small games required different weapons, different tactics. Plants became primary food sources. Bands that couldn't adapt starved beside rotting giant carcasses they considered cursed. Some tried to follow the giants north, believing they'd migrated. Expeditions found only bones. Others dug desperately at traditional mammoth wallows, convinced they were hiding underground. The denial phase lasted years. Surely the giants would return with the seasons. Children born after the dying wouldn't believe their parents' stories. Hairy elephants tall as trees. Impossible. The cave painting seemed like fantasy art, not documentation. Within 2 generations, the living memory of giants faded to mythology. But one detail haunts me. At multiple sites, the last mammoth kills show unusual patterns. No butchering, just killing. Spear points left in place, as if humans were desperately trying to prove they could still hunt giants that were already ghosts. Killing the last ones, just to feel powerful again. Marcus lived another 20 years after the Great Dying, became expert at hunting deer, fishing, gathering, and survived the transition. But his son reported that Marcus never smiled again. Something had broken in him the day he stood among hundreds of mammoth corpses and realized the world he'd known was dead. The last mammoth in continental North America died alone, probably in Canada, sometime around 10,500 years ago. No ceremony, no witness, no marker. The age of giants ended, not with drama, but with quiet gasping in some forgotten valley. The day the giants died was the day humans inherited an empty earth. We'd won the evolutionary competition by default. not through superiority, but through being the only contestants left standing. The weather had gone insane. Morning blizzards gave way to afternoon heat waves. Rivers froze and thawed daily. Rain fell upward in bizarre microclimates. This was 10,000 years ago, and Earth's climate system was having a complete nervous breakdown as the Ice Age died. For the Thompson family band in what would become Colorado, every day was meteorological roulette. They developed 17 different shelter configurations, switching between them sometimes hourly. Waterproof for sudden floods, insulated for snap freezes, ventilated for heat bursts. Architecture as survival performance art. The chaos created impossible scenarios. Frozen ground in July that melted to swamp by August, snow falling on blooming flowers, ice storms followed immediately by tornadoes, weather patterns that shouldn't exist in the same millennium, much less the same day. Traditional knowledge became actively dangerous. Grandfathers' wisdom about seasonal patterns got people killed. The stars still moved predictably, but nothing on Earth followed their rhythm anymore. Every hard-won lesson about survival required unlearning. But here's what's remarkable. Humans thrived in the chaos, not despite it, but because of it. Every other species was locked into genetic programming, unable to adapt quickly enough. Humans had culture, the ability to change behavior in real time, to share new solutions instantly across populations. The Thompson band developed chaos strategies. Never camp in the same place twice, always have 3 escape routes, keep resources distributed, never centralized. Trust nothing, verify everything. Paranoia as adaptation. They invented predictive systems based on insect behavior, which responded to pressure changes hours before weather shifted. When ants moved uphill, floods were coming. When birds flew in circles, tornadoes approached. When earthworms surfaced, earthquakes. Nature became an early warning system for those who learned its new language. The social structure evolved rapidly. Traditional leadership based on inherited wisdom became obsolete. Instead, whoever read the current conditions best led that day. A child who noticed cloud patterns might override elders. Expertise became situational, not permanent. Innovation exploded from necessity. Portable everything, homes, tools, even fire systems, multi-use items, because carrying specialized tools was impossible when you might need to run at any moment. The Swiss Army knife wasn't invented in Switzerland, but in climate chaos Colorado. Food storage transformed. Instead of seasonal caches, they developed preservation methods that worked in any condition. Smoking, salting, freezing, drying, sometimes all applied to the same kill. Hedging bets against tomorrow's random weather. The children born into chaos were different. They didn't expect stability, so they weren't traumatized by change. They played games about adapting. What if water ran uphill? What if snow was hot? Their brains were wired for possibility, not pattern. This cognitive flexibility created behavioral modernity. Art became abstract because representing realistic nature was impossible when nature changed hourly. Music became improvisational. Stories became fluid, changing with each telling to match current conditions. The archaeological record from this period looks schizophrenic. Tool styles changing constantly, dietary remains showing no pattern, settlements abandoned and reoccupied randomly. Archaeologists initially thought the dating was wrong. No, the people were just adapting that fast. The Thompson band's descendants wouldn't recognize the stable Holocene climate that followed. To them, predictable seasons would seem like stagnation. They'd been shaped by chaos, thrived in uncertainty, evolved past the need for stability. By 9,000 years ago, the climate was settling into patterns that would persist until now. The chaos survivors had won through flexibility, not strength. They'd proved humans could adapt to anything by adapting to everything simultaneously. Modern climate change seems tame compared to what the Thompson band faced. Temperatures rising over decades, not hours. patterns shifting over generations, not daily. We're equipped for this chaos because our ancestors were shaped by worse. The old woman was the last person alive who remembered mammoths. At 93, impossibly ancient for 9,500 years ago, she'd seen the world transform from one filled with giants to one dominated by humans. Her great-grandchildren thought her stories were dementia. She knew they were history. The earth was louder then, she told them, though they didn't understand. How could they? They'd never heard mammoth herds that sounded like thunder, never felt ground shake from giant sloth footfalls, never fallen asleep to dire wolf howls that harmonized across valleys. What we lost was majesty, a world where humans were small, where nature was genuinely dangerous, where survival required humility. The Ice Age forced partnership with the environment because domination was impossible. You didn't conquer a mammoth. You negotiated with it through careful hunting. You didn't defeat winter, you endured it. But we'd gained control. No more checking shadows for saber-toothed cats. No more competing with giant bears for caves. No more watching children starve because mammoth migrations shifted. The empty world was safer, predictable, manageable. Humanity's playground instead of nature's gauntlet. The old woman remembered when every adult could identify 200 plants, track 50 animals, and predict weather from cloud shapes. Now, specialization was emerging, dedicated toolmakers, full-time gatherers, people who only fished. Knowledge was narrowing as it deepened. Survival skills that everyone once needed were becoming specialized professions. We lost languages, not human languages, but interspecies communication. Ice Age humans could read mammoth body language, interpret wolf pack dynamics, and understand bear territorial markers. This wasn't mysticism, but practiced observation. When the megafauna died, that knowledge became useless, then forgotten. But we gained time. Without constant vigilance against giants, humans could think beyond tomorrow. Art evolved from documentary to decorative, music from functional to entertainment, stories from survival guides to literature. The cognitive space once occupied by threat assessment could explore abstraction. The old woman watched her descendants with a mixture of pride and pity. They were healthier, better nutrition without seasonal starvation, safer. Predation was rare, more numerous, populations exploding without megafauna competition, but they were also diminished. They'd never know the adrenaline of facing down a charging mammoth, never experience the satisfaction of a successful giant hunt, never feel the awe of watching saber-toothed cats stalk by moonlight. They lived in a tamed world, and tameness had made them tamer. We lost ecological diversity that created anti-fragility. With megafauna gone, ecosystems simplified. Grasslands became forests or deserts. Seed dispersal patterns collapsed. Nutrient cycling slowed. The complex web became simple chains, vulnerable to single failures. But we gained agricultural possibilities. Megafauna would have destroyed early farms, trampled irrigation, made sedentary life impossible. Their absence created space for civilization. Every city stands where giants once walked, possible only because giants no longer walk. The old woman remembered medicine that worked. Plants that grew only in mammoth-disturbed soil, now extinct. Hunting rituals that bound communities, now meaningless. Navigation by giant trails, now overgrown, practical magic lost with its context. We gained mythology. The giants became gods, monsters, spirits, their memory transformed into religion, philosophy, psychology. We needed explanations for our dreams of being chased, our fear of the dark, our sense that something massive once moved through the world. She died knowing she was the last thread connecting two worlds. Her death would break that thread forever. Her great-grandchildren would live entirely in the new world, never knowing what the old world felt like. Her final words, "You are alone now." She meant humans were alone without the giants, but also that each generation would be alone, unable to truly comprehend the world their ancestors inhabited. The Ice Age didn't just end. It took with it a way of being human that could never be recovered. You wake at 3 a.m., heart racing from a dream where something enormous chases you through darkness. You check your phone obsessively for threats that rarely materialize. You crave fats and sugars with an intensity that defies logic. You feel safest in groups, anxious alone, constantly scanning for dangers that no longer exist. Welcome to your Ice Age brain, perfectly calibrated for a world that vanished 10,000 years ago, but still running your life with software debugged by dire wolves. Every anxiety disorder is a survival mechanism that kept your ancestors alive. That's social anxiety. It prevented exile from the band, which meant death. Fear of public speaking. Being noticed by the group could mean judgment, exclusion, starvation. Your brain treats a work presentation like a saber-toothed cat because evolutionarily, they're both threats to survival. The obesity epidemic. Your Ice Age ancestors who stored every available calorie survived famines. Those who didn't died. You inherited the winner's genes, programming that screams, "Eat now," because your brain expects the mammoth hunt to fail, winter to last forever, starvation to always loom. Your circadian rhythm still expects Ice Age patterns, wake with dawn, sleep with darkness. But you fight it with artificial light, creating jet lag without traveling. The result? Insomnia, depression, metabolic chaos. Your brain, confused, responds as it would to endless Arctic summer or winter with mania or hibernation impulses. That inexplicable fear when you hear rustling in darkness. For 300,000 years, rustling meant death. Your amygdala doesn't know the predators are gone. It floods you with adrenaline, preparing for fights that won't come, creating anxiety that has no outlet except worry. You're attracted to certain landscapes, rolling hills with scattered trees, water views, multiple sightlines. Psychologists call this savanna preference, but it's Ice Age practicality. Those landscapes meant good hunting, escape routes and resources. Your aesthetic sense was programmed by survival needs. The hoarding impulse that fills garages with unused items, Ice Age resource caching, the tendency to overeat at buffets, feast behavior for uncertain futures, the panic when your phone battery dies. Separation from the group meant death. Modern behaviors, ancient fears. Your tribal instincts create us versus them, dynamics in politics, sports, social media. Your brain can genuinely care about 150 people. Dunbar's number, the size of Ice Age bands. Everyone else is abstract. You'll donate to save one identified child, but ignore statistics about millions. Your empathy has Ice Age limits. Seasonal affective disorder isn't a disorder. It's an appropriate response to winter that means death. Your brain, sensing shorter days, initiates hibernation protocols. Slow down, conserve energy, minimize risk. Modern life demands constant productivity. Your brain demands winter rest. The conflict creates depression. Risk assessment is broken. You fear plane crashes, rare, but not car accidents, common. You worry about stranger danger, minimal, but not lifestyle diseases, maximal. Your brain evaluates threats based on Ice Age patterns, sudden, violent, visible, not modern ones, slow, systemic, invisible. You form deep attachments quickly in crisis, then struggle to maintain relationships in stability. Ice Age bonding was survival. You needed absolute trust immediately. Modern gradual relationship building feels wrong. You're programmed for intensity, not casual acquaintance. Physical activity feels good because movement means survival. Runner's high is real. Endorphins that let persistence hunters continue through pain. Exercise treats depression because your brain interprets movement as successfully fleeing or pursuing. Sitting still registers as danger or death. You can't throw away food without guilt. can't resist sale prices, can't stop checking for threats, can't relax without substances, can't be alone without anxiety, can't be in crowds without stress. You're running Ice Age software in a digital world, and the mismatch is killing you slowly. But here's the thing, that same Ice Age brain that torments you with anxiety also gifts you with creativity, cooperation, and adaptability that no other species possesses. Your ability to imagine threats that don't exist also lets you imagine futures that could exist. The Ice Age isn't gone. It lives in your neurons, your hormones, your instincts. Every human carries 300,000 years of survival programming. You can't delete it, but you can understand it. That 3 a.m. anxiety. Thank your ancestors and remind your brain the saber-toothed cats are extinct. You are the Ice Age, walking around in modern clothes, trying to make sense of a world your brain never evolved to navigate. The giants are gone, but their ghosts live in your amygdala, forever running from the shadows of mammoths. The Ice Age ended outside. Inside, it's eternal winter, and you're still trying to survive.